Chapter 1 of Strip, Wench, or Die by Gene Cross. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by Ben Tucker. Strip, Wench, or Die by Gene Cross. Chapter 1 The Naked Truth. Sam McGovern, fat, explosive chief claims adjuster for 7 Seas Insurance, rapidly scanned the expense account that Rip Austin slid gingerly across the desk to him. His homely face reddened. His fist clubbed the glass-topped desk so hard Rip winced. He expected to see shattered glass fly any second.
"Austin," McGovern exploded. "If I've told you once, I've told you a dozen times. The company's not going to pay your goddamn whore bills. This is the most bald-faced swindle I've seen in a lifetime of associating with dishonest insurance investigators."
Mac, I swear by everything holy that this expense account is absolutely honest. You see,
Holy? Now, if you swore by a hole, I might believe you. It's the only sacred thing in your chippy-chasing life.
Sam, this woman is 63. The old Austin charm doesn't work on that age. She insisted on being paid for her information. If you don't believe me, go ask her.
And that's just what I intend to do, McGovern snapped. It isn't me, Rip. It's that son of a bitch Sims. He's on my tail about these inflated expense accounts you thieves are turning in.
The shrill buzz of his desk phone cut McGovern off. He picked it up and grunted.
Yeah?
Instantly his manner changed.
Yes, sir, Mr. Sims, he said quickly. Sorry, sir. I was just checking a Rip Austin expense account. Yes, sir. You're absolutely right, sir. He's a first-class crook. Yes, sir. The Internal Revenue people should be informed about his high-handed shakedowns. Yes, sir. No, sir. He positively will not get away with it this time, sir.
The receiver kept squawking, but McGovern's manner changed. The lines seemed to deepen. The fat man came rigidly alert.
Naked? McGovern said incredulously. Pretty, huh?
Austin's interest quickened. He came over and stooped until his head was beside his boss's to catch the conversation from the other end of the line.
"She had a G-string, nothing else,"
Rip heard the tinny voice of Sims, the company's general manager and Austin's sworn enemy.
"That looks phony as hell," McGovern said. "Even strippers don't go riding around in their work clothes." "Yes, sir. I'll get right on the case. We'll have to pull a man off another case."
"What about that oversexed thief, Rip Austin?"
Sims said.
"Naked belly dancers sound right up his line."
Sam McGovern looked up at Rip and winked.
"But he just quit, Mr. Sims. I refused to okay his expense account like you said. He claimed to have an offer from Great National."
"Well, get the hijacking son of a bitch back,"
Sims said.
"Pay him if you have to. We need him on this job. How much is he trying to swindle this time?"
McGovern began, but Rip reached swiftly across the desk and inked $300 over the $150 he had previously written. Mac's face purpled. He glared at Rip, who smiled back innocently.
300, McGovern said in a strangled voice.
300?
Sims bleated.
"No, don't pay it. I'll see that crook in hell first."
"Yes, sir. Then I'll pull Merrill off the arson case, and..."
"Merrill can't handle this kind of case. Pay the 300, but check his next report with a fine-tooth comb. If you can find any discrepancy, I want him jailed. Understand?"
"Yes, Mr. Sims. One moment, please." "Miss Dial, Rip Austin is leaving the building. Stop him, please. And now, Mr. Sims, you have the file on this case?"
Rip went back to his chair, and Sam Mack scribbled notes as Sims filled him in on the case. When he hung up, Sam took a moment to scratch an OK on the disputed expense account. He shoved it across the glass to Rip. "Thanks, Sam," Rip said.
Sam Mack grinned sourly. "It's not for loving us, Buster," he said. "It's just that I get a kick out of sticking that son of a bitch Sims."
"Okay," Rip said. "What's with the disputed nude?"
"She's dead."
It happens to all of us sooner or later.
When there's $40,000 of 7 Seas Insurance Company's money involved, we prefer it to be later, Sam Mack pointed out grumpily.
"What happened?" Rip asked.
"The girl was Sally Vaughn. She borrowed a car belonging to a strippers union official and went for a ride in her G-string. She was found in the wreckage of the car. She was dead."
"What do the police say?"
"That she went to sleep The car strayed off the pavement, hit a soft shoulder, and rolled down a steep embankment. It is officially on the books as an accident."
"And how did Sims get in on this?" Rip asked. "The claims report should have come to you."
"It did, and I saw nothing fishy in it. The police report made it look pretty definite. Then Sims got a call from our local man. He's a professional adjuster who handles several companies' claims in that area. This is up on the peninsula. His name is Frank Whiteley. He's scared to death."
"The entire peninsula area is gangland controlled," Rip said thoughtfully. "It's jammed with tourist traps, strip joints, bars. Gambling is wide open. You don't have to call a call girl. She's already called you. Some pretty high politicians are being paid plenty to keep that cesspool stinking."
"That's right," Sam said. "The police are crooked, so there is an off chance that the accident report was phony too. The girl could have been bumped off for the insurance."
"What gives with this local adjuster? What's his name?"
"Whiteley. He called Sims. Claimed he was an honest man. He didn't dare expose his family to gangster threats by coming into the open on this thing. Said he was going to file a report recommending payment of the claim, but suggested Sims send out an undercover man to really dig into the mess."
"I don't know, Sam," Rip began, unsuccessfully trying to hide his pleasure under a phony mask of concern. "Those boys play rough up there on the peninsula.
Not one goddamn cent of bonus," Max snapped.
"But Sam, a dangerous job like this calls for a little something extra."
"There are, according to my report, 315 strippers and bar girls working on the peninsula," McGovern said, punctuating each word with a stab of his finger at Rip Austin. "And if I know you, you'll be playing gee-whiz with their G-strings before you're on the case an hour. That will be your bonus, chum."
"Aw, hell, Sam, you can—"
"And have an understanding with the girls before you take them to bed. It is strictly for love. 7 Seas Insurance Company is not going to pay for their favors via the swindle sheet."
Austin sighed. "Someday I'm going to quit this penny pinching outfit and start a company of my own."
"Okay," McGovern said. "Here's the pitch. I'll arrange with the National Union headquarters for you to go up there as one of their men. That'll give you a good reason for nosing around. Now, if you've been reading the papers lately, you've seen a lot of dirt the McClellan Committee has been digging up about the rotten way strippers and exotic dancers have been brutalized and forced into prostitution. This is a different union up in the peninsula. It's an independent outfit known as the Club Dancers International. They unionize strippers, b-girls, waitresses, and just about any kind of woman associated with clubs."
"Isn't $40,000 a pretty heavy policy for a cheap stripper to carry?" Rip asked.
"It was for 20 grand, Max said. Double indemnity for accidental death. Yeah, it looks phony. Now, I had a tip recently that the McClellan Committee has the peninsula on its list of future places to investigate."
"So you think this girl was lined up to spill the dirt to the senators, and someone shut her mouth the hard way?"
"And then added insult to 7 Seas by rigging it to look like an accident, so we pay the local Murder Incorporated's fee," McGovern said sourly.
"Okay," Rip said. "When do I leave?"
"Just as soon as you can look over the file on Sally Vaughn."
"Good enough, Sam," Rip said, getting up. "I'm on my way." A sardonic grin split McGovern's moon face.
"And Rip, don't lay down on the job."
"You know me, Sam. I'll be back with the naked truth." Austin spent the afternoon inspecting the files and digging out from police and reporters all the background he could get on crime and vice conditions in the area known as the Peninsula. Then a trip to the newspaper room in the city library brought him up to date on the facts of the girl's death. It hadn't even rated an inch in the metropolitan papers, but the Peninsulaville Journal covered it very thoroughly on the first day. The second day lead, however, dropped back to a couple of inches with the want ads. Rip read this follow-up with more interest than the original story. It indicated to him that the story had been deliberately played down. Austin was thoughtful as he left the library. He had long since learned that it is difficult to stand alone in a case. An investigator needs help. But the case of the slain stripper seemed to be shaking up into one where he would be right in the middle of a gang of experienced killers without a soul on his side. He had often used local newspapers and reporters to his advantage in a case. But in Peninsulaville, it looked as if the gang had the papers sewed up too. To him, this meant that the gang had everything firmly in hand. Normally, newspapers are the last guardian of decency to fall. Despite the promising prospect of working with 315 strippers, Rip could see little in the case to arouse his enthusiasm. He was a maverick whose high-handed ways of doing things put him in constant hot water with his company's officials. He had no illusions. He was tolerated in his well-paying job solely because he got results the other company investigators could not produce. In doing so, he saved Seven Seas Insurance millions each year. But he had only to fall down on the job to have the company wolves at his throat. If he got in trouble, he would be expected to get out of it himself. He went back to the Seven Seas office building. Some of his depression was lifted when a shapely elevator girl smiled invitingly at him. He found that Sam had worked fast. The chief investigator handed him a package of cards neatly engraved with Austin's name and the legend, Field Representative Club Dancers International Union.
"I called the union's international president," Sam Mack said. "He's anxious to cooperate with us on this. He's notified the local that you're coming in to help organize a raid on their rival union's membership."
"Can we trust him?" Rip asked.
"You tell me after it's over," Sam Mack replied. "Back in my beat-chasing days, I learned that it's only after a case is wrapped up that you really know whom to trust completely."
"You're a cheerful bastard," Rip said irritably. When he left McGovern for the second time, Rip debated whether or not to cancel a couple of dates he had lined up for the weekend. It was only a 3.5-hour drive back from the peninsula, and he could easily make it back. One of the girls was a triple-stacked movie starlet, and the other was a luscious hat-check girl in a Sunset Strip club. Both loved their loving frequently and in large quantity. Since this was Rip's feelings also, it was a true mating of kindred souls. The problem was not getting back to them. It was, did he want to come back? He thought of the feel of Mickey's huge breasts rubbing his cheeks when he buried his hungry mouth between their satiny mounds. Then he thought of Bobby, the hot feel of her lips, the wicked twist of her wanton thighs, and the devouring way she made love as if this was the last night in the world. He closed his eyes, momentarily reveling in the mental picture of their lush nakedness. He sighed. "Nobody but a castrate would walk out on those sex machines," he muttered as he climbed into his convertible in the company's garage under the huge office building. "But, on the other hand," he argued, and the gleam in his eyes brightened, "variety is the spice of sex life." He thought of the strippers, exotic dancers, and b-girls of the peninsula. He nearly drooled. But not being one to burn his bridges behind him, for he frequently found the need for a hasty retreat, Rip found time to drop in on both girls before leaving. "I've only got a minute," he said hastily at each place, before climbing into bed for an hour. So what with one thing or another, it was nearly midnight when he wheeled his T-Bird into the peninsula area after a 3-hour run up the coast from Los Angeles. The change was startling as he crossed the county line. Garish neon lights were everywhere. One gaudy place butted right against the sign that separated the two counties. A huge flashing red marker told people coming up from the south that this was the first chance in. On the opposite side, a twin sign proclaimed to those leaving the county that this was their last chance. Rip glanced at the gas gauge. A road sign informed him that Peninsulaville was still 15 miles down the highway. The needle of the fuel marker had been sitting on empty for several miles. Much as he hated to stop, he was afraid not to take the time to fill up. He pulled into a filling station opposite a small club topped with a neon sign that said it was the Pussycat Club. The 3 letters making up cat were dark. Rip smiled cynically. He suspected the sign had been deliberately sabotaged by the manager and doubted it would be fixed ever. When the attendant came running out, Rip said, "Fill her up." He nodded toward the club. "What kind of a joint is that?" he asked. The teenager at the pump leered. "Part of the name fits the place," he said. "Rough, huh?" Rip asked. "Man, they take everything off and rub it in your face." "No law up here?" "We got a sheriff, but he's like the city police in Peninsulaville. He understands." "Yeah?" Rip mumbled through the cigarette he was trying to light. "What does he understand?" "That a wide-open town's good for business. Hell, it don't hurt nobody. People come, spend some dough, and have a good time. Who's hurt?" "Nobody, I guess," Rip said. "I guess you have a good time yourself." "On what? It takes dough and stacks of it to get a tumble from these broads." "I guess this sort of thing does help business." "You said it." The boy set the pump on automatic and stepped back to run a comb through his ducktail. "The bastard I worked for used to starve. Nobody stopped here. They barreled on into Frisco. Now, since the county opened up, he gets more business than he can handle." "The mob doesn't bother you, huh?" Rip asked. "Mob? That's a laugh. The boys are gamblers, but what's wrong with that? Over in Nevada, it's legal. I don't see why just crossing a state line turns an honest man into a gangster." "I don't either," Rip said. He dug out a 20 as the boy capped his gas tank. "Keep the change." The attendant's eyes shone. "Thanks," he said, and added hopefully, "Gonna be around here long?" "I'm with the Dancers Union over in Peninsulaville." "No crap." The youth's mouth flopped open. He looked at Rip as a baseball fan might ogle Mickey Mantle. "Hey, there's a dancer at the Tomcat Club in Peninsulaville that I'd give my left testicle to get at." "No kiddin'," Rip said. "That's a high price to pay." He looked the boy over carefully. He wore a leather jacket and had long sideburns. Rip suspected that he carried a switchblade knife as standard equipment. He put him down as about 18, give or take a year either way. "Yeah, but she'd be worth it. Man, I'm telling you, she's real kooky. She comes out for her act with nothing on but the skin you love to touch. She carries this toy kitten which she holds in front of her crotch. She starts singing a song called Won't You Kiss My Little Pussycat. The way she sings it, there's a long pause before she gets the word cat out. Man, it gets you. At the end, she throws the cat away and shows you everything she's got." Although a great believer in the necessity of sex, Rip felt only disgust at the boy's slobbering lust over a cheap prostitute stripper's lewd act. "You stupid punk," he thought. "You should be out with some high school drum majorette learning about sex and life in a clean manner instead of popping your glands over a tramp." But openly he acted interested. A would-be tough punk like this might be a valuable source of information to him. "Now, you being in the union could fix me up with her," the boy went on. I'm not sure I could even fix it up with her for me," Rip said. "Girls have to go for a guy. We might not be your type." The boy snorted. "Anybody with $200 for the night's her type. Only I haven't got that kind of money. My hot rod keeps me busted. But the girls have to put out for free to anybody the union business manager says to. It's part of the payola. Maybe I could do something for you, and you could pay me back with her." "Well, I tell you, Jack." "It's Bill. Bill Kirk." "I'm just getting here and don't know my way around yet. But let me nose around and see what the score is. Then maybe we can work out something. Sometimes I need to know something. Maybe you could find it out. And maybe I could sort of help you out. Who knows?" Yeah, Bill Kirk said eagerly. "Just ask me anything." "Okay, Bill, I'll—" "Jesus!" Bill cried, interrupting Rip. "Look at that!" Austin whirled around. He saw a girl running toward them. Apparently, she had ducked out of the Pussycat Club. At first glance, she appeared to be completely nude, but as she came out of the darkness, the lights of the service station revealed little silver pasties over her swollen breasts. A G-string, a flimsy dot of cloth, completed her lack of costume. The string had apparently broken, for Rip saw that she was grasping one side to keep the whole thing from falling off. Her face was a mask of terror. Tears streaked down her face, blinding her so that she almost collided with a gas pump. Rip leaped forward, grabbing her waist to keep her from falling. Bill Kirk's face reddened with envy, and he cursed himself for not thinking of helping the girl. However, it was to get his arm around her rather than real help that motivated his envy. Help me, please," she cried, clinging tightly to Austin. As she grasped him, her hold loosened on the G-string. It fell on the pavement. Okay, honey," Rip said. "I'll take care of you. What's the matter?" She raised her tear-stained face. He saw that she was very young, despite the lushness of her body. She could not have been over 18. "They're trying to kill me," she gasped. Wondering if she was drunk, Rip stooped so he could get the scent of her breath. All he smelled was chewing gum, and his eyes were filled with the huge mounds of her shapely breasts. He felt delighted, amused, and somewhat embarrassed all at once. Except for the tinsel pasties on her nipples, she was completely nude since dropping the broken G-string. Cars were passing in a steady stream in the street. They could not help but see him there, with the naked girl's arms tightly around his neck. He wondered if things like this were included in the peninsula's wide openness, or if the police would come charging out to throw both him and the girl in jail. Unfortunately, he was so interested in her well-exposed charms that he failed to see the two men running toward them from the club. "They're going to kill me," she repeated. "Not now," Rip said. "Come on, get in the car before somebody sees you like this." He had in mind soothing her fears and perhaps tucking her gently in bed, along with himself. But suddenly he froze, his nerves quivering. She said, "They're going to kill me like they did Sally." "Sally Vaughn?" Rip asked quickly. She gasped. "You knew Sally?" "Everybody knew Sally," a flat voice said out of the darkness. Rip jerked his head up to see a stocky man with a rough face accompanied by a smaller man, whose close-set eyes and sharp features gave him a ratty expression. The latter picked up the fallen G-string. "Better put this on, honey," he said in the curious flat tones that Rip first heard. "You'll catch your death of cold running around without it." The girl whimpered and clung more tightly to Rip's neck.
"Don't let them take me," she cried.
"Now you're making me mad, isn't she, Tim?" the flat-voiced man asked his companion.
"Yeah," Tim said. "She's making you mad, Ace."
"And when I get mad," Ace cut off voluntarily, leaving the rest of his threat hanging. He reached out and roughly dragged the girl away from Rip. "Wait a goddamn minute," Rip snapped. He took a quick step toward Ace, his fist doubled, his face hard and furious. But Tim moved quickly between them. His movement was surprisingly swift and light for one of his bulk. Moving just as swiftly, Rip stuck out one foot. At the same time, his arm swept around and tripped Tim over the extended leg. The big man hit the concrete driveway with a bone-shaking thud. Alarmed, Ace stepped back, dragging the girl with him. His hand shot up to his coat lapel as if going for a shoulder holster. Rip threw his arms around both Ace and the girl in a great bear hug. He swung them around and shoved. Ace's back hit hard against a gas pump. Rip reached over the frightened girl's head and hit Ace's chin with the heel of his hand. It banged the clubman's head back against the metal frame of the pump. He sagged, dragging the naked girl down with him. Rip whirled back to the other man. He was still unconscious from the bump his head took against the pavement. Rip turned back to Ace. The man's face was livid. He brutally shoved the girl aside and tried to drag out his gun. Rip caught his wrist. Ace's foot slammed up into Rip's stomach. For a moment, Austin went blind with electric pulsing pain. His body doubled up involuntarily, but he kept his death grip on his opponent's wrist. To turn loose now meant death for him, he was sure. The red blinding fire from his tortured belly still blinded Rip. He knew only that he still had a firm grip on the other man's gun hand, but he couldn't see how the gun was pointing.
Girl! Girl!"
he gasped huskily, choking the words out in pain.
"Hit the bastard! Club him in the head with your shoe! Hurry! God damn it, hurry!"
He could see her only as a red blur. He couldn't tell if he was getting through to her or not. Suddenly, Ace relaxed in Rip's grip. Fumblingly, Austin tore the gun from the dazed man's grasp and threw it as far as he could into the darkness. Then, crawling to the pump, he felt his way to the air and water hoses, and squirted the full pressure of the water into his own face. The shock of the water cleared his senses some. He staggered to his feet. He still couldn't stand straight.
"Get in the car," he said through clenched teeth. "We got to get the hell out of here. Fast!"
End of Chapter 1. Chapter 2 of Strip, Wench, or Die by Gene Cross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 2 Death in the Night. As Rip Austin wheeled the T-Bird into the street, he looked back. Tim was still out, but Ace had staggered to his feet. He was waving frantically to two men who came running from the club. Rip grinned and turned back to watch the road ahead. A diesel truck loomed dead ahead, crossing with the light at a major highway intersection. Frantically, Rip jammed hard on the brakes. Tires squealed as rubber dug into the concrete. The girl was thrown forward against the padded dash. She gasped in fear. Rip pulled her back against him. A lustful hotness pulsed through him as his hand slid across the silky skin and closed on an up-tilted breast. The tinsel pasty over the nipple irritated him. He pulled it off. The girl said, "Ouch!" but did not pull away. Rip grinned happily. His fingers gently massaged the outraged nipple. The girl raised her tear-streaked face.
"Are they?"
she whispered fearfully. "Don't worry your pretty head about those bastards," Rip replied. "I'll take care of you."
"You're wonderful,"
she said breathlessly.
"They're so tough."
"Honey, when the prize is something like you, I can be tougher than any son of a bitch in the world."
"I never knew there was a man like you in the world,"
she whispered.
As
she spoke, she turned to look back. She broke off with a gasp.
"That car!"
she cried.
"They're following us."
The light turned green. "No, you're imagining things," Rip said.
"No, no!"
she cried hysterically.
"I know the car. It belongs to Ace Bartlow. There's someone in the car with him. I can't tell who it is."
Rip jammed the accelerator to the floor. The car shot forward. The following vehicle stayed with him. The girl pressed harder against Rip.
"I'm afraid,"
she whimpered. "That makes two of us, babe," Rip thought. But aloud he said, "Don't worry, honey. We took care of them before. We'll do it again.
Why are you doing this for me? She asked suddenly. They're killers. You don't know what you're getting yourself into.
Rip expertly slid around a truck, scaring hell out of a driver in the approaching lane as he narrowly missed a head-on collision. That'll give us a breather, he said with satisfaction. The way traffic is right now, your buddies will be hung up behind that truck for a few miles anyway. Now, tell me, what am I getting into?
You knew Sally Vaughn? You mentioned her name.
I knew her once. She was killed up here. Car wreck, they said.
It was murder. She knew too much.
Like you?
More than me. She threatened to tell the McClellan Committee, and they killed her. They beat her to death in the back room of the Red Rock Club in Peninsulaville and made it look like a car wreck.
Did you see it? Rip asked.
No, but I know it's true.
Guessing?
No, someone saw it. A girlfriend of mine. Her name's Kooky Marsh.
Why was she killed? Rip asked. He pulled his arms from around her quickly as a sharp curve required both hands on the wheel.
Don't,
she said.
Put your arm around me. It feels... I don't feel so lonesome and all alone with your arm around me.
Rip dropped one hand from the wheel and ran it across her shapely thigh. She sighed, but his practiced ear detected no trace of lust in it. She was too scared. All she craved was a man's protection. But I'll take care of that, Rip thought, luxuriating in the hot fires that licked at his loins as she rubbed her frightened voluptuousness against him. His hand stroked the smoothness of her naked thigh, moved suddenly over. Gently, yet insistently, he tried to work his fingers. She gasped and pulled back. Her hand tried to push his away. For the first time, she seemed conscious of what he was doing.
Please,
she said.
I've never done anything like that.
You wouldn't try to kid me, would you? Rip said, his fingers fighting with hers.
No, I swear it's the truth,
she said, almost whimpering. There was something about her reluctant fear that rang true. Puzzled, Rip gave her a searching stare. One doesn't usually find reluctant virgins shaking their breasts and bumping their pelvises in lewd salute to sex. How long have you been stripping? He asked.
Well, I started 3 weeks ago, but all I've done is study. The union has a school over in Peninsulaville. This was my first job.
Oh, Rip said. That explains it. What happened to send you flying out of the club?
Well, you see...
He reached over and patted her shoulder. When she didn't resist, he pulled her gently against him. He had to fight down the impulse to spread eagle his fingers around the luscious curves of her full young breasts and brutally squeeze at need. Okay, he said gently. Tell me all about it.
I thought, well, I want to be an actress more than anything in the world.
I know, Rip said. I'm from L.A. I've heard the story 1,000 times. Hollywood locked the gate when it saw you coming. You beat on the door until your money gave out. Then somebody gave you a steer into this stripping racket.
That's about it,
she admitted, suddenly starting to cry again. Rip slid his hand up along her cheek in a gently soothing caress. It's okay, he said. If it hurts you to tell about it, forget the whole thing.
No, I want to tell you about it. I hate this thing. I hate the way those bug-eyed bastards stare and drool at me. But I've just got to break in some way. I've just got to.
What happened? Rip insisted, hoping that the girl's experience would give him some clue to what had led up to the death of Sally Vaughn.
The first 2 shows were okay. I did just what I'd been taught. I wiggled and twisted and took my clothes off like I'd been told and shown. The spot was in my face. I couldn't see those lewd bastards out front too well. That helped some, but I felt dirty. I felt like bugs were crawling on me.
She took a deep, shuddering breath. Her soft, ripe flesh shook under his hungry fingers.
Then at the last show, Ace Bartlow told me to take everything off. I told him I wouldn't do it. He grabbed my G-string and ripped it off me. He shoved me back against the wall and slapped my face until I cried. He's like a madman when anyone crosses him. He killed Sally. He didn't intend to. She wouldn't take off her G-string either. He beat her. She still refused. He went berserk. He grabbed her by the hair and hammered her head against the wall.
You poor kid, Rip said, fatherly patting her shoulder. Then, making an exploratory pass downward, he gently touched her breast. When she did not pull back, he lightly cupped his hand under it, thrilling to the delicious feel of the softly swelling flesh.
I don't want to be a whore, she cried fiercely. Can't a girl be an actress? Can't she get a break without that?
Sure, he said. You just got a tough break getting in with the wrong crowd. You'll make it. I'll help you.
You're not just saying that to do it to me yourself.
Honey, I'm a man, and I got everything a man's supposed to have. And right now I got the neatest little naked package I've seen in years rubbing up against me. I wouldn't be a man if I didn't want to crawl right in that package and wrap it around me. But I'm not a complete sex maniac. I'm not going to rape you. As soon as I get a chance, I intend to try and talk you into it. Don't get mad about it. That's just the way of a man with a mate. If you really don't want to, you don't have to. If I'm not man enough to make you want it too, I don't want it from you either. She raised her head, staring with her mouth partly open at the strong line of his profile as it was lighted by an oncoming car's lights.
I love you,
she cried suddenly. Now, wait a minute. We just met. I don't believe in this love at first sight crap.
I do. I do love you. And it isn't love at first sight. You're just the kind of man I've dreamed about since I was a little girl. You're no stranger. I've known you always. When I played with my finger and daydreamed as a little girl. When I hugged a pillow against me in bed and hungered for a lover. Whenever I thought of love, it was always a man just like you.
Her arms went around his neck. She arched her body. Her breasts crushed against him as her lips touched his cheek. He turned his head and their hungry mouths came together. They touched only momentarily. The improperly tended car strayed out of its lane. An approaching driver kicked his high beam switch and brilliant lights hit the windshield in a blinding warning. Rip jerked the wheel over and forced himself to keep his eyes on the road.
Honey,
he said huskily.
honey.
She reached over and pulled his right hand off the wheel. She violently rubbed it across her breasts and down across her curving body.
It's all yours. Anytime you want it. Anywhere you want it,
she cried.
Just don't let them kill me.
She broke off, fearfully looking back.
He's got around the truck,
she cried.
They're gaining.
Take it easy, Rip said. Let the son of a bitch chase us. This is an open, busy highway. They can't take a chance on doing anything to us here. Too many witnesses.
You don't understand. They own the law here. The worst one of them is a policeman himself. Ace is a deputy sheriff. He can shoot us down and say we tried to escape.
Rip cursed. The explosive outburst was directed at himself. In his lustful contemplation of the luscious naked package Fate had piled in his lap, he had failed to consider all the dangers he faced. He realized that what the girl had said was true. He was playing tag with killers who either had the law in their pocket or were the law. Okay, he said aloud. Don't worry. I'll take care of you.
Give it more gas, she cried. We've got to get away.
It's floorboarded, baby, he replied. That's a caddy back there. We're not going to run off and leave it.
Then I'm getting out,
she cried, her piled-up hysteria exploding. She twisted around, her face wild with fear. She hit the door handle. Rip grabbed at her, and she started to leap from the car. He caught her by the hair and jerked her roughly back. The wind slammed the door shut. She screamed and clawed at him. The car swerved, hit the shoulder, and gravel sounded shot loud as it hammered the underside of the fenders. He backhanded her hard against the face. He spun the wheel. The car came back on the pavement and straightened out. Rip took a wild chance on a dangerous pass and shot ahead of a slow-moving station wagon. Ahead, he saw the mercury lights of an intersection. The light was green. Rip jammed hard on the brakes unnecessarily, but he couldn't get used to the power brakes. Tires squealed and drivers screamed curses as the long line of cars behind tried frantically to avoid a pileup. Rip released the brakes almost instantly and shot forward, leaving the cars behind momentarily stalled. He hit the brakes again at the intersection and swerved off on a two-lane crossroad. The lights of the gangster car turned. Rip could see that it had pulled off on the shoulder to get around the traffic. It shot forward, dangerously passing on the right. Rip grinned grimly. He had expected that, but he wasn't trying to get away. The two cars were too evenly matched for that. He had another, and even more dangerous plan. His wild gamble with the traffic had given him a couple of minutes' lead. He shot down the narrow road until it curved around a rise. He braked, cut his lights, and swerved off on the gravel shoulder. He whipped the wheel around, backed up, cut again, and when he faced the direction he had come, hit the light switch. He jammed down the accelerator and shot forward. As the T-Bird topped the rise, he saw the oncoming lights of the Cadillac. He pulled to the left so the two cars approached each other dead on. Now, he said grimly, let's see who chickens out first. The two cars hurtled toward each other, closing the gap so rapidly there was scarcely time to think. Rip thought he saw someone lean out the side. The lights of the T-Bird picked out what looked like a gun. Sweat popped out on Rip Austin's face as he grimly held the T-Bird's course straight toward the other car. From his years of experience, he knew that the average gangster was a coward beneath his tough veneer. Ace would chicken out, but the question was, would he go into a funk and fail to swerve fast enough? He wanted to shut his eyes. The lights of the caddy were blinding. The girl screamed wildly. Her strangled cry was like sharp fingernails tearing at the raw ends of his nerves. In unreasoning fear, she threw her arms around his neck. He was momentarily blinded. The T-Bird weaved as he struggled with her. Ahead, Ace Bartlow pulled to the side and went off the pavement. The big car rocked and bounced, hurling gravel and a heavy rain of rocks. It did not turn over. Blinded by the hysterical stripper, Rip fought to keep control of his own car. The front wheel went off the pavement. He tried to bring it under control. Gravel and dirt kicked back by the wheel as it dug into the comparatively soft ground pulled him over. The back wheels skidded. The car went completely around. Before he could apply brakes, it shot across the road. Rip had the brakes against the floorboard, trying desperately to stop. The right front wheel hit a drainage ditch. The car bucked. The wheel was jerked from Rip's hand. The car spun completely around, hung for a moment on two wheels, and went over. Rip grabbed the wheel in a frantic attempt to brace himself. The girl's naked body was hurled against him. He tried to get his free hand around her to brace her as much as he could from the coming shock. There wasn't enough time to do all he had to do. The car hit on its side. Much of its speed had been braked, but there was still sufficient momentum to throw them against the windshield. Rip's body partially protected the girl, but his own head cracked heavily against the glass. His head fell back between her naked breasts. He was past feeling any sensual pleasure, nor did he hear her piercing screams except as something vague and very far off. The lights of the Cadillac hit their crumpled bodies and then dimmed. Rip thought he heard voices. He tried to sit up. A harsh voice said, "Stop that bitch's yelling!" A gun flared in the night, red muzzle fire stabbing toward the girl. The bullet struck directly between her lush breasts where Rip's head had lain only a moment before. Blood spurted against the side of his face. Rip tried to draw his own gun. He managed to get it halfway out of the shoulder holster before it was knocked out of his hands. A fist hit him. His head dropped back in the dripping blood between the dying girl's breasts.
"Shall I let him have it too, Ace?"
"No," Bartlow replied. "He's got LA plates. I don't want any outside attention up here. Let me handle this." The other man laughed. Rip tried to struggle. Ace Bartlow hit him hard against the temple with the barrel of a .38 automatic. This time Rip went out for good. He came to lying on a wooden bench in the Peninsulaville police station. He groaned and sat up. There was a strong smell of alcohol in the room. It came from his clothing. He looked around, searching for a sign of a bottle. He needed a drink as bad as he ever had in his hard-drinking life. All he saw was a bare room. The wooden bench on which he lay and a desk were the only furnishings. A heavy man with a face as hard and unfriendly as cold concrete sat on the edge of the desk looking at him. Rip ran his fingers over his aching head. There were 2 fist-sized knots, but the skin was not broken. Austin shook his head, trying to focus his eyes a little better. The motion set up a fearful clanging in his skull. "God damn," he said thickly. "Give me a drink before my damn head bursts open."
"This is a police station, not a goddamn bar,"
the big man said. Rip squinted at him, finally getting the double image to fuse into one. What he saw looked like an understudy in modern clothes of Captain Bligh of the Bounty. "No crap," he said. "I thought it was a hospital and you were my damn nurse." The big man's face flushed. His ham-sized fist nodded.
"Aren't you in enough trouble without asking for more?"
he said heavily. "I'm in no trouble," Rip retorted. "And instead of acting like a tough cop with me, why in hell aren't you doing something about that poor girl?"
"What in hell can I do for her? I'm no undertaker."
"Have you got the bastards who shot her?"
"Shot? That bump on the head must have scrambled your brains if you ever had any. Nobody's been shot. She was killed when you flipped that T-Bird while driving under the influence of alcohol. That's a pretty serious charge in this county."
Rip got to his feet. "What in the hell are you trying to pull?
That girl was shot by Ace Bartlow and—" "Yeah? Where was she shot?"
"Right between the breasts." The big policeman stared thoughtfully at Rip for a moment.
"There's something funny as hell about this,"
he said. He slid off the desk and walked over to jerk the door open.
"Les, bring me those pictures," he shouted down the hall.
"Sure thing, Sarge," a voice called back. He resumed his perch on the desk. Rip rubbed his aching head and cursed the heavy smell of alcohol that only made his terrible thirst worse. The door opened and a small man handed some 8x10 glossy photo prints to the big policeman. The latter nodded and the little man left. One of the pictures was shoved across to Rip. It was a flash shot into the front seat of the T-Bird before it was moved. It was a typical accident-type police identification shot. He and the girl were sprawled in the seat, but from the angle it was taken, the wound in her breast was not visible. "Is that the only picture?" he asked.
"That ties you and her together."
"Hell, I'm not denying she was in my car. He broke off as a second picture was shoved across the desk to him. It had been taken in the morgue, apparently. It showed her lying on a marble slab. There was a beautiful cut across her temple, but the beautiful flesh between her breasts was smooth and clear." "Where is the bullet wound?" Rip sat down slowly. The clanging in his head made it difficult for him to think. The picture of the girl's death was vivid in his mind. It was true that he had taken a hell of a bump previously, but he was certain that he had not dreamed a wanton murder. He took a deep breath and looked back at the picture. His careful scrutiny showed no marks of retouching. The policeman watched him intently. When Rip looked up, he passed over the typewritten report of the investigating officer who went to the wreck.
"I responded to a radio call at 1:53 a.m. and found a 1963 Thunderbird overturned on the Little Rock Road. The driver was slumped over the wheel unconscious and smelling strongly of alcohol. His passenger, a young woman, was completely nude. Her head was badly cut and there was no sign of a pulse."
"Your name?" The policeman's heavy voice interrupted. Rip looked up. "Ripley J. Austin," he said. "What's yours?"
"Don't get gay. Occupation?"
"Union organizer." The police sergeant's expression changed.
"What union?"
he asked. "Club dancers."
"Huh,"
the policeman said. It was a sort of non-committal grunt. "Look," Rip said, "let me tell you what happened." The big man shook his head. "That's late. I gotta get some sleep. So let me tell you what happened. That way it'll be straight." He rubbed his hands against his knees and stared hard at Austin. Then he said, "You drove up from L.A., you stopped at Kirk's filling station at the county line. While Billy Kirk filled the tank, you took a healthy swig from a bottle. What the hell are you trying to pull?"
"Shut up!"
the big man snarled.
"I'll tell you when to talk."
Rip got to his feet. His fist nodded and then slowly relaxed as he stared into the muzzle of a .38. His .38.
"Now, you took a heavy swig from this bottle, and then you made a deal with this broad from the club. You were seen to pass her a $20 bill to go with you. You were too cheap to rent a motel room. You drove up the Little Rock Road looking for a dark place to collect the sex merchandise you'd paid for. You were drunk. You drove too fast. You ran off the road. You wrecked the car. You killed the bitch with you."
Rip leaned back against the bench. He stared at the cold face of his accuser. His scrambled brains were beginning to shake back into place. "If you could force a trial in this country, you just might make a charge like that stick," Rip said evenly. "But there is such a thing as change of venue. In the new district, a lot of embarrassing questions might come up which would have to be answered."
"Such as?"
"Why don't we let my lawyer do my talking from here on?"
"If you tell a straightforward story, there might not be a need for a lawyer. What I told you is the story the way we pieced it together from witnesses. What's your side?"
Rip met the steady stare of the cop. There was an open invitation in the man's expression. He knew then he could walk out of the jail a free man, provided he was willing to pay a price. And that price was to get out of the county and stay out.
"What's your side?"
the policeman asked again. "It was an accident."
"Yeah? All that evidence points to a double charge of driving while intoxicated and negligent homicide."
"Okay, book me," Rip said firmly, trying to look confident of his ability to beat the charge.
"On the other hand,"
the big policeman said, slowly turning Rip's .38 over in his hands,
"the woman was nothing but a two-bit whore. The county is better off with her gone. The only one hurt's the manager of the Pussycat. He took a loss because she didn't come back, and it hurt his show."
He stopped, looking steadily at Austin. Rip tried to keep his face composed. He knew what was coming next, and it fitted right in with his theory of Sally Vaughn's death.
"But Mr. Bartlow, he's the Pussycat manager, takes out insurance policies on his performers, so if anything happens to them, his business won't suffer."
"Yeah," Rip said.
"So you sign a report of what happened for the insurance company so Ace, Mr. Bartlow, can collect his money, and we'll officially call it an accident. You'll be released."
"How much insurance does this girl carry?" he asked. The policeman shrugged.
Who knows? An employer has a insurable interest in the people who work for him. He can take out any amount that would cover his loss if something happened to them, and hurt his business."
Rip thought fast. To sign the accident report would be a fraud. On the other hand, it was the fastest way to get out of jail. He decided to go along with the swindle temporarily, but knew it would look phony if he agreed too fast. If it's very much, he said, the insurance company will make its own investigation before paying off. The big cop grinned bleakly.
Not if one of the company's ace investigators personally signed the report, he said.
This hit Rip so hard he had difficulty keeping his surprise from showing. His accuser laughed.
And going through your billfold, we didn't find a permit for that rod you carried. Since you were driving LA plates, it only took one phone call to find out the gun's serial numbers were registered in the name of Rip Austin, claims investigator for 7 Seas Insurance.
S. Holmes was a piker, Rip said.
Okay, Austin, now let's have it straight. What are you nosing around here for?
Just call me Rip, Austin said.
What'll I call you? Frank's good enough. Frank Lyall. I handle homicide.
I'm the new business agent for the Strippers Union, Rip said. Didn't you find my business cards when you frisked me?
A cover, Lyall snapped. You were nosing around on that Sally Vaughn accident. I don't like it.
Why not? Rip asked.
Because I've already investigated the case. It's closed. You're calling me a goddamn liar when you try to reopen it. And I don't like that worth a crap.
I see, Rip said. I got only one thing to say to that.
Yeah, what?
Put some clean sheets on the bed in my cell. End of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 of Strip Wench or Die by Gene Cross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3 Harlot's Union.
You'll goddamn well regret this, Austin.
The hearing on Rip's petition for bail the next morning turned into a hot battle. The district attorney, obviously prompted by Frank Lyall, made a last-ditch fight to have bail set so high it would be impossible for Rip to post it. After his release, Rip, the 7 Seas lawyer who came to aid him, and Sam McGovern had a conference in a motel room at the edge of town. The lawyer, Jerry Sennett, was frank about Rip's position. It is going to be a hard fight to get you out of this mess, he said. They have witnesses to back up their story in every particular. What have you got?
My innocence, Rip replied. This is a frame.
I know, Sennett said. This is not the first time I've been called to get you out of the hoosegow. As I recall, it was about 11 times.
12, Rip said unhappily.
And in 9 of those cases you admitted privately to me that you were guilty as hell, although you pleaded not guilty to the judge.
You're giving away privileged information, counselor,
Rip said irritably. Sam thought I was innocent every time. McGovern smiled thinly. I may be an idiot, but I'm no fool. The point I'm making is that if you say you're innocent, I believe you, Sennett said. But what I believe doesn't do one damn bit of good. It's what the judge and jury think.
And you think they'll think what I'm thinking they'll think?
Well, look at it this way. Their story is that you got drunk, took a whore out to lay her on a dark road, and killed her through drunken negligence. Your story is that she was murdered by a shot between the tits. Great story. I can see the jury's eyes open with horror when I tell them. I can see them open wider when the DA shows them a picture of the girl in the morgue with her lusty flesh unmarked. Rip took a deep breath.
Look, I don't ask you to believe me. Ask Sam there. There are 2 things in this goddamn world I don't do. One is get drunk when I'm on a case. The other is to imagine things.
That's right, McGovern said. But he always ties on a doozy when the case is wrapped up.
This thing is a frame to get me off the Sally Vaughn investigation. They killed her and then made it look like an accident to collect insurance.
The same thing happened with Nancy Oxford, McGovern said. 40,000 smackers.
Who is Nancy Oxford? Rip asked.
Both Sennett and Sam looked surprised. You mean you went off with this naked broad, loved her up for God knows how long, got her bumped off for her pains, and never even asked her name?
Well, Rip said lamely, I was sort of, excited. There was nobody along to introduce us. I know it sounds odd, but I just didn't think about her name. Didn't make any difference anyway. Call her a rose or call her an onion. Those pretty things she shoved in my face would stick out just as far.
Then you did make her.
No, worse luck.
Oh, hell, Rip, I'll bet.
Sam, I know I'm a chippy-chasing bastard, to use your exact words, Sam, but lay off that girl. She's dead, and the poor kid had as much right to go on living as any of us.
McGovern's face clouded. He looked sharply at Austin.
Rip,
he said in alarm.
You didn't fall for the broad, did you?
No, Rip said slowly. But she came to me and asked me to help her. I should have run. I didn't, though. I told her I'd help her. Sure, I told her that because I thought she was a lead in the case and because I figured on a hot, easy lay for the night. But that doesn't make a goddamn. I told her I'd take care of her, and I wasn't man enough to do it.
Now look here, McGovern said, his alarm growing. I've warned you before about getting emotionally involved in a case. It means trouble every time.
There's nothing emotional about this, Sam, Rip said quietly. I'm just going to hang the son of a bitch who killed her. That's not emotional. It's judicial.
Rip, you're heading for worse trouble than you're in now, Sennett said quickly. Sam, I appeal to you. Get him out of here. If he starts trying to act like Sherlock Holmes, it'll only make it harder for me to get an acquittal for him. Rip, you're coming back to L.A. It isn't worth it, boy. Believe me,
You can fire me for not going back, Rip said stubbornly. But neither one of you happens to be man enough to drag me back, and that's the only way I'll leave. Sennett threw up his hands. I wish to hell heaven would give me a sensible client just one time before I fall dead trying to protect the guilty from their just deserts. McGovern leaned back, rolling a fat cigar in his hands as he glared at his stubborn investigator.
There's one more way you could leave here, he said, and that's feet first.
Look, I can take...
And don't hand me that crap about how they aren't man enough to do it. They are.
So they are. But I'm tough too, Sam. Whether I'm tough enough is something to be decided.
For Christ's sake, Rip. It's just a goddamn case. I'll put somebody else on it.
I'm staying, Sam. As the official investigator for 7 Seas, or just as Rip Austin.
If you're hell-bent on getting killed, you might as well do it on the company's time. Sims will probably want to cancel your own insurance policy when he hears what the setup is.
Both Sarah and Nancy had $20,000 policies with double indemnity for accidental death. That's a total of $80,000 the company is going to lose if I don't crack this thing.
The son of a bitches up here all have policies on their employees, McGovern said grumpily. We could get taken for a mint if this racket isn't quashed.
I'd suggest canceling every policy the company has written up here, Sennett said.
There's too many of them. We'd lose a fortune in premiums, McGovern said. The law says that before an insurance contract is legal, the insurer has to have an insurable interest in the insured.
Yeah, Rip said. That was to stamp out the racket of insuring your enemy in your favor and then bumping him off.
Maybe you could tackle the case from that angle. Ace Bartlow's insurance interest in these girls was the fact that they were supposed to be keystones in his entertainment. If they got sick or hurt, it would presumably ruin his business, so that is considered insurable interest. Now, if you can prove fraud was involved and he didn't have an insurable interest, we don't pay.
Sennett shook his head. No go, Sam. The policies are legal. No cheap stripper in a 2-bit joint like these is worth $20,000 to the management, Rip said.
I know, Sennett said.
But the time to question that was when the policy was written.
Sam said heavily. We thought it was another publicity stunt. You know, actors and actresses are always insuring their profiles, dinguses, and precious nipples for some fantastic amount to get their name in the paper. Sims expected the policies to lapse after the first premium.
Sennett got up. I must get back to Los Angeles, he said. I'll be back for the preliminary hearing. In the meantime, feed me anything and everything that might have the slightest bearing on the case. Anything specific you want? Rip asked. The lawyer shook his head. You know this business as well as I do. The main thing is to break down their witnesses. We won't even know who they are until the preliminary hearing. One will be a pimply young punk named Billy Kirk. He's the filling station attendant. He must be the one that got to swear I took a drink. I'll have a talk with him.
Remember, you're in serious trouble, Sennett said, alarm in his voice. If you're caught intimidating a witness...
I'm not going to intimidate the bastard, Rip said. I'm going to talk to him about girls.
Now, bribing a witness is just as... Come on, Sennett, Sam said, getting up. Rip Austin is one of those smart bastards who'll do as he pleases despite all the good advice still smarter bastards like us can give him. Let's go home and leave him to his fate.
After they had gone, Rip took a scalding shower and felt a little better. He stood in the steamy stall, luxuriating in the sting of the hot needle spray on his naked body, and planned his next move. The preliminary hearing in his case was 4 days off, which meant that he had to work fast. He ticked off the things he had to do first. Most important was a quiet, straight talk with the young service station attendant. But since Billy Kirk had been on duty so late the previous night, Rip doubted that the boy would be out this early. Secondly, he wanted to dig as deep as possible into the backgrounds of Ace Bartlow and Frank Lyall, especially into their connection with each other. Equally important was a check-in at the union. Although Lyall's checking on the gun permit had exposed Rip's insurance connections, he was still accredited to the union. They could not refuse him cooperation. The order to work with him had come down from the national headquarters. The things the dead girl told him indicated that the strippers were badly mistreated. "That means they'll be hot to talk about their troubles," he said aloud. "And old Rip is just as hot to talk to them." Under the circumstances, the union seemed the best place to begin. He dressed hurriedly and rented a U-Drive car to take him over to the local office. It occupied 2 shabby rooms over a downtown drugstore. The only occupant was an old woman of indeterminate age who still showed traces of what must have been a rare beauty a long time ago. Rip gave her his most engaging smile. She wasn't taken in. She gave him back a sour stare.
"What size, shape, and hair color?" she asked. "When do you want her for, and for how long?"
She fumbled in her desk and brought out a large photo album. She shoved it across to Austin.
"If you haven't spotted one at the clubs who suits you, pick her out now. The fee varies with the girl. Show me which one, and I'll tell you how much."
Rip opened the book. Inside were plastic sheets protecting nude photographs of a variety of girls. Names were written under each picture. As Rip turned the pages, he noticed a blank where a picture had been removed. Sally Vaughn's name had not yet been erased. Then, flipping the pages rapidly, he scanned through the pornographic collection, seeking Nancy Oxford. He found her close to the back. Seen without her mask of fear, Nancy had been an amazingly fresh and pretty girl. Her high, up-tilted breasts were sculptured art. Her trim waist flared around curved hips that swelled down to long, shapely legs. The photographer had posed her back to the camera. The shift of weight to her left leg made a gentle S-curve of her beautiful back and buttocks. Demure as the pose was, the classic nude effect was rudely broken by the full-length mirror which reflected an extremely candid view of her secret charms. "This one," Rip said.
"Okay. 24 an hour in a motel. 150 for the night. No, wait, that one's scratched. Had an accident last night."
She pulled the picture, ripped it to pieces, and dropped the remains in the wastepaper basket.
"Pick another. We got all kinds."
Maybe I'd better think it over. Your prices are sort of steep."
"Then get the hell out and stop bothering me. This is no place for cheapskates."
"You might be a little more polite, sister," he said, shoving one of his union business cards across the desk to her. "I'm one of the boys."
"Oh,"
she said. Her wintry expression did not fade.
"Why in hell didn't you say so? Pick out one. I'll have her report over to your place. There's no charge for visiting union officials."
"What do the girls think about giving away their merchandise?"
"They don't think it's worth a damn, but who cares what those bitches think? They're not being hurt. You can't wear the thing out."
"No, guess you can't," Rip said mildly.
"And, buddy, I should know. You wouldn't think it to look at me, but I was an Everleigh girl. You don't know what that means, do you?"
Rip shook his head. "I guess not," he said. "The only Everleighs I ever heard of was those 2 sisters who ran a fabulous whorehouse in Chicago. But that was a long, long time ago. Most every book about Chi exclaims in awe about that place."
"That's the joint,"
she said. A tender smile crossed her face, and her entire personality seemed to change.
"A girl is a fool to reveal her age, but it's the truth. Mina and Ada introduced me to the business. We weren't a bunch of dirty whores like those stripping bitches. By God, we were ladies, and we acted like ladies whether in bed with a man or not."
"I'm sure of that," Rip agreed hastily. "But you sure don't look old enough to have been with the Everleighs."
"Oh, I've had my face lifted so many times I feel like an elevator. Young man, I'm 83. I'd lie about it, but it's a matter of record that the Everleigh house was closed down in 1911. Life has never been the same for me since. Oh, hell, don't think I'm complaining. I had a full life before my beauty faded away. Now all I got is memories. And I wouldn't take $1 million for 'em. You know what somebody said? God gave his children memories so they could have roses in December. I got 'em, bud. I got 'em in big bouquets."
"I'll bet you have," Rip said. He was in a hurry, but was afraid of offending the garrulous old tart. Later, she might make a damn good source of information about the inner workings of the union.
"By heaven, sex should be a pleasure. The way these bitches go at it's just a filthy business. Now, when I was peddling with the Everleighs, I gave more than my body. I gave romance.
Hell, I actually loved the guy while I was with him.
You know, Rip said, the tragedy of my life was that I was born too late to have girls like you. She sighed.
I could have given you a rose that would have perfumed your goddamn garden of memories forever after. But what the hell? You didn't come here to gas with a worn-out old tart. Pick you out a girl. If she doesn't pitch it up to suit you, let me know. I'll kick her big fat behind.
Well, Rip said doubtfully. Shooting trapped pigeons wasn't his idea of fun. He liked to go into the field and flush out his own game. But while he was trying to frame an answer that wouldn't offend the old tart, a new approach occurred to him. If the girls were incensed at being forced to give themselves for free to favored individuals, he could play on that righteous anger for information. He paused before a beautiful shot of a nude girl. Unlike the rest who exposed their sex frankly, this one demurely held a fluffy toy kitten over her privates. Rip thought of the way Billy Kirk had drooled when he spoke of this girl in her double entendre song about her pussycat. "I'll take this one," he said. He didn't have to do much acting to put on the right kind of leer. The girl was a masterpiece of lustful sex. The old crone looked regretful.
Not tonight," she said. "She's booked. I'll fix you up tomorrow. It may be a little late. She's pretty popular after her act. We set her up for 15-minute tricks in the back of the club. I'll have her come over to your place about 3 a.m. Is that okay?"
"Nothing tonight, huh?"
"No, Ace Bartlow over at County Line Strip needs her to pay off a debt he owes some punk. A witness in some kind of a case. If it wasn't something important like that, I'd cancel it out and you could have her. But you see how it is."
"Okay," Rip said. 3 a.m. tomorrow. It's a date. Now, one more thing before I leave you to your memories. Where can I find... He paused, unable to remember the name. He fished a card from his billfold and said, "J.M. Trevor, the union's business agent." The old woman raised her eyebrows cynically. She glanced at the wall clock.
"This early? Probably still in bed with fat Frank Lyle. Well, everybody to his own taste, I guess."
Rip's eyebrows raised. He recalled Lyle as a manly-looking character despite his grossness. He did not appear the queer type. However, his investigative experience had long ago taught him the mistake of judging any man or woman on appearances. Rip's eyes gleamed. If Lyle was a fairy, it would give him a splendid club to use against the man. "Do you have Trevor's address?"
"Now, you're a nice boy. Don't you go getting mixed up with that bag of crap."
"This is business. I'm supposed to check in with Trevor. The national headquarters sent a letter about me."
"Just take an old woman's advice. Stay away from that place. Do your business here. Some pretty strange things go on there, I hear."
"Queer things?"
"As queer as a $3.50 bill."
"I don't go for that crap," Rip said.
"Me either," she relied. "I don't like waste, and that's wasting something that's not going to be with you forever."
She sighed and rummaged in her desk.
"Here's the address if you want it," she said.
As Rip turned to go, she said,
"I'm old Labby, in case you ever need to call me."
"I'll never call you that. What did they call you at the Everly house?"
"Lavon LaRue. Miss LaRue, if you please. Mina was very strict. She insisted that the guests treat us like ladies."
"Okay, it will be Miss LaRue to me."
"Hell, that's all over. Call me Maggie Murphy. That's when I was born. And although I've played many parts in my time, I guess at heart I never stopped being a Maggie Murphy."
The back office door opened. A girl who strongly resembled a famous French actress right down to the baby-face pout came out. Rip stared at her. She dropped her eyes and flushed as she went past him. He looked after her with genuine interest.
"Lay off," the old tart said with a twisted smile. "That's private stock."
Rip left the Club Dancers Union Hall in considerably better spirits. Things seemed to be looking up. He felt that he had a genuine ally in the old woman if he could figure a way to use her profitably. "Rip, old boy," he told himself, "I got a hunch this case is getting ready to lay itself down and die. First, I'll scare the ass off that would-be tough Billy Kirk. Then, when I get his testimony out of the way, I'll hit Frank Lyle with a charge of being queer. Then, when I offer some of the girls protection, I should have no trouble getting their testimony about forced prostitution. They couldn't have recruited this many girls without bringing some over the state line. That opens up a Federal Mann Act angle. With pressure on the bastards from all sides, I'll break both murders wide open." He had hoped to break in on Trevor and Lyle together, but as he turned into the short, highly exclusive street where Trevor lived,
He saw Lyall pulling away in a police prowl car. For a moment, he considered dropping the Trevor angle and driving out to see Billy Kirk. But after a moment's thought, he decided it wise to size up Trevor alone. One of the many things he needed to know was how stiff the man's spine was. The idea that all queers are lisping pansies who go into shock at any roughness is as false as the front so many women put up. Rip felt that it would put him on more solid ground to know just what kind of a man Trevor was. Imagine a goddamn pervert in a job corralling a herd of stripping whores, he muttered. That's a position for somebody like me. He parked in front of the 2-story brick house. It sat back on well-manicured lawns, split by a terrazzo walkway bordered by flowering shrubs. He placed the house in the $100,000 bracket. He pressed the bell. A full minute later, he pressed again. Then, when a prolonged wait brought no response, he leaned on the bell and kept his finger there. The minute hand went around and a halfway again. Then the door was suddenly flung open. Rip took his finger off the bell, blinked in surprise, and stepped back to get a better view of what stood in the doorway. His eyes started with the unruly pile of attractively tousled blonde hair and swept down past angry blue eyes to a luscious full-blown mouth with lips that made a man hunger to chew on. A demure housecoat that reached to the floor was fastened by a single button in the high collar about her neck. Right there, the demureness stopped. The coat was pushed back over her shoulders like a cape. Her arms were not in the sleeves, and the scarlet garment made a glowing backdrop for her satin and ivory body.
"Well, what in hell do you want?"
she snapped. Despite the anger that marred it, her voice was sexily throaty.
"Are you anxious or just got your pinky caught in the doorbell?"
Naked women were hardly anything new in the life of a loving rounder like Austin, but he was hardly used to having one come to the door of a fashionable mansion in broad daylight. He looked at the massive mounds of her breasts, huge, but beautifully formed with nipples that jutted upward with almost virginal audacity. Her belly was flat, and under the apparently soft skin, the slanting morning sun disclosed the rippling, graceful muscles characteristic of belly dancers who needed the power to wildly shimmy their hips and bump their pelvises at their drooling audiences. Her long, lithe legs swept up from graceful ankles to blend beautifully into her splendid body. Rip began and could get no farther. All he could get his stunned mind to think about was shoving that gorgeous hunk of flesh back on a soft, springy bed.
"Well, if you can't say it, write me a letter," she snapped.
"Well, excuse me while I get my breath," he managed to say. "I'm looking for a Mr. J.E. Trevor."
"Mr. J.E. Trevor?"
She arched her eyebrows.
"Try the graveyard. He died 11 years ago."
"There must be some mistake," Rip said. "I was given this address at the Union Hall. Trevor's the Union business agent." She looked at him with amusement. An angry flush stained Rip's face. He hated to be laughed at.
"I assure you," she said, "that Mr. J.E. Trevor is dead. He was my father."
"Oh," Rip said. He intended to say more, but the girl threw back her shoulders. Her big breasts shivered. Rip sighed and tried to recollect his thoughts. "Maybe I got the initials wrong," he said. "Does the business agent of the Club Dancers Union live here?"
"Oh, yes,"
she said. Her red, hot-looking lips parted in a half-smile.
"You want J.E. Trevor."
"Wasn't that what I said?" Rip snapped.
"You said mister,"
she replied, her eyes still laughing at him.
"And as your bugging eyes should tell you, I am not a mister."
"For Christ's sake," Rip said.
"I am Miss Julie Elaine Trevor. And you?"
"In addition to being a damn confused fool, I am Rip Austin. I think the national headquarters sent you word I was coming?"
"Oh,"
she smiled brightly and stepped back.
"I was expecting you. Won't you come in?"
Feeling uneasily like a fly walking into a spider's parlor, Rip stepped inside. She closed the door and said somewhat irritably,
"Please don't stare. It's impolite."
End of chapter 3. Chapter 4 of Strip Wench or Die by Gene Cross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 4 Audition of Lust. Rip raised his eyes from her naked flesh. "Then don't give me so damn much to stare at," he snapped. She shrugged.
"I'm a nudist. Clothes are an unnecessary bother."
She motioned him to a chair.
"It's too damn early for a drink, so let's have one anyway," she said.
Without waiting for his reply, she went to a bar in the corner of the living room. She splashed scotch over some ice cubes. When she brought it to him, he could smell liquor on her breath, and she swayed just a little as she walked over to fling herself on the divan facing him. Although she carried it well, she was obviously drunk. Neither spoke. Both took advantage of their drinks to keep quiet and size up the other. There was a slightly puzzled expression on Julie Trevor's face. Rip's face didn't show it, but he was equally confused. He realized that the mistake in Julie's sex was his own fault. The union had given the business agent's name with initials. The natural supposition was that it was a man. Thinking back over his conversation with old Lavie at Union Hall, he realized that neither had said anything that would bear on whether the business agent was a man or woman. But the thing he could not understand was the old tart's reference to queer things that went on at Julie's house. He recalled specifically asking if this meant perversion, and she had clearly intimated that it did. But something was wrong. There clearly was not what he expected. It was impossible for him to believe there was anything queer about the relation between Julie Trevor and Frank Lyall now. He shrugged. There were more important things to think about than the tortured ramblings of a senile old tart's mind. He tried to think about them, but a great expanse of lustful nakedness displayed by Julie made it difficult to focus his mind on anything except making a mattress of that glorious hunk of flesh. Suddenly, deciding that she had shown enough, Julie primly pulled her robe together.
"Now, Mr. Austin," she began.
"Just call me Rip," he replied. "After all, I have seen quite a lot of you." Her passionate-looking lips set in scarlet line of disapproval.
"You're a lewd bastard," she snapped. "That's the trouble with being a nudist in this foul-minded world. The human body is something wonderful. It's a crime to hide it under a tent of stifling, ugly clothes. But you're forced to because filthy scum like you can't see the whole mountain because you've got your eyes only one tiny little hole in the cliff."
She jumped up and went to the bar. This time she didn't bother with the glass. She tilted the bottle. Some of the liquor dribbled down her chin, and the sunlight through the window made the drops sparkle like jewels as they ran down the beautiful valley of flesh between the passionate swelling of her breasts. She jerked the bottle from her lips with an odd gesture. It was as if her hungry scarlet mouth was fighting to retain it, and her prim arm was trying to stop her compulsive drinking. It was only one of many little ways she betrayed a mixed-up soul, in which two sides of her struggled for control of the sexy shell. She swayed. Her breasts shivered. Her hips ground and made a strip-teaser's pelvic bump. Her eyes closed. Her scarlet soft lips half-parted. Her oval face twisted in passionate pain. Her entire body flushed as some lewd fire deep within surged through her veins. She seemed on the point of exploding with the scalding ecstatic torture. She swayed and would have fallen if Rip had not rushed forward to grab her. She twisted in his arms. She gasped and looked at him in bewilderment. It was as if she had forgotten he was there until his hungry arms went around her.
"Here,"
she said thickly, shoving the scotch bottle at his mouth. The open neck of the bottle hit his cheek. This was fortunate, for she jammed it at him with such force that it would have knocked his teeth out if she had hit his mouth.
"Drink," she said. "Drink, you lewd bastard. Drink. It's the only real thing in this goddamn unreal world."
Her hand shook so badly the liquor dripped down on his shoulder. Rip had to grab her wrist to steady the bottle so he could get it to his lips. His other hand slipped from its retaining grasp around her waist to the curving delight of her buttocks. The fire of the whiskey in his stomach was like a flickering match compared to the conflagration roaring up from his loins to engulf his entire body in exquisitely painful, yet delightfully hungering flames. For a moment she swayed against him. He could feel the wild beat of her heart through the robe. Then she suddenly twisted from his grasp. It came so unexpectedly at the point where he thought she was yielding that he did not have time to tighten his grip and hold her. She stepped back. Her trembling hand stripped the robe away. She flung it angrily to the side as if it was something unclean she was tearing from her flesh. She seemed to have forgotten he was there again. She stared vaguely across the room where a low-key oil painting of a nude woman stared sympathetically back at her.
"I'm so hot," she said, twisting her body feverishly. "Oh, my God. I'm burning up. I need love. Oh, God in heaven, why do you torture me so?"
Rip's first reaction was shock that a woman who just came from the bed of Frank Lyall should still be on fire. Then he grinned. "That fat son of a bitch wasn't man enough to take care of you, was he?" Rip said, his voice thick with mounting passion. "What you need is that old fire, laddie. Rip Austin to put out that fire." He swept her hot nakedness up in his arms. She collapsed against him, shuddering. He buried his hungry lips between her breasts. Her body shook in his arms, almost as if in revulsion. His mouth moved upwards, fastening with almost vampirish hunger on her throat. She moaned. He laughed thickly and moved his head until his mouth closed on the pinkness of her strawberry-sized nipple. He started for the bed. He could see it through the door opening into the next room. But it was too far away, 20 feet at least. In his sexual agony, 20 steps were 20 miles. He stooped and laid her on the floor. She sprawled on the soft rug. Her arms were flung out, her eyes were tightly closed, and she breathed with little choking sobs. He tore at his clothes. When he was as naked as she, he knelt on the floor beside her. Roughly, he pulled her shuddering body against him. Her arms went around his neck. Her big breasts smashed against his own nakedness. Her body seemed detached from her head and mind. Her flesh was writhing and begging for him to take her, but her face had gone placid, almost as if she didn't care. His angry fingers dug into the soft firmness of her breasts. She gasped in pain and opened her furious eyes. "Come alive, damn you!" he rasped through clenched teeth.
"Damn you,"
she whispered as she smothered his mouth with her hot, moist lips. Their bodies moved together, the wild rhythm of two people practiced in the arts of love. The tension mounted until it became too great to endure, and then it released with a violent explosion that ripped open the dams within him, draining lust, strength, and part of his soul in one great flood of relieving emotion. He caught his breath, and when it was over, released it in a groaning gasp. His big body was heavy against hers. She tried to push him away. He resisted with a sort of dreamy anger, content to lie there forever and luxuriate in the softness of her.
"I'm dying," she whispered. "I'm dying for a drink."
Reluctantly, he got to his feet. There was only a large water glass left at the bar. He splashed about an inch into it.
"Fill it up,"
she commanded. He looked down at her in surprise. She had raised up on her elbows and was staring at him with a strange expression that worried him slightly. He shrugged and filled the glass to the brim. He brought it over and knelt beside her. She drank almost a third. It might have been water, the smooth way it went down her throat. She pushed the brim of the glass against his mouth. "Drink," she said. It was a queen's command. Rip took a sip. "Drink," she snapped. "I said drink, not wet your tongue." "I don't want the damn stuff," he retorted. One arm swept around her, the fingers spread eagling around her left breast. The other hand touched her thigh and moved upward in search of something more interesting. She slapped his hand away. "Stop that," she almost snarled. Rip wound his hand in her tangled blonde hair. He forced her head back and smashed his lips against hers. When he broke away, gasping for breath, he said, "If you thought what happened a few minutes ago was the end, you're crazy as hell. Maybe it's just the beginning. We've been looking for each other for a whole lifetime, and we've got that lost time to make up."
"I won't go with a goddamn man who won't drink with me."
"Okay, baby," Rip said. "If I get so drunk I can't do you any good, it's all your fault." He let her tilt the glass to his lips. He drank as long as she held it there. She laughed as he went into a wild coughing. Tears came into his eyes. He said. She hugged him, twisting her shoulders so the big breasts rubbed sensually across his bare chest. He suddenly bit her neck.
"Ouch!" she cried. "That hurts."
He laughed. "Sorry, but..." His voice dropped to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm a little bit drunk." He laughed like this was the funniest remark a man ever made. Still laughing, he rolled over on his back and pulled her full-blown nakedness on top of him. He closed his eyes, joyously hugging her against him.
"What are you doing?"
she asked softly. He opened one eye and tried to focus it on her pretty face. "It's a great big secret, but I'm going to let you in on it because we just happen to be drinking buddies, see?"
"I see,"
she said encouragingly.
"Not so rough. Those are the only nipples I've got."
"The only ones you got? That's funny. Honey, you don't need any more."
"Now what is this great secret about what you're going to do?"
"Well, it happens that you're the grandmother of all Eves. And what I'm going to do is prove to you I'm the granddaddy of all Adams."
"I mean," she said insistently, "what are you doing here in Peninsulaville?"
"I'm doing this."
"Stop that," she snapped. "That hurts."
"Sorry, I'm..." His voice dropped to a secret whisper.
"A little bit drunk." "What are you doing here?"
A sharp, insistent tone cut through Rip's alcoholic fog. Suddenly he was on the alert. The change in the girl started warning bells clinging back in his brain. He suddenly realized she was not as drunk as she tried to appear herself. All that jazz about liquor was just to get him so befuddled she could pump him. He laughed. He was at that stage when everything was funny. He kept on laughing, overcome with glee at her stupidity. He was just on the point of telling her so when he caught himself. He leaned back and owlishly inspected her statuesque beauty. "I'm your new organizer. Didn't you get a letter about me?" She nestled closer to him, taking his head between her breasts.
"But what are you really here for?"
she whispered. "Oh," he said, bouncing his head up and down. "Just like a foam rubber pillow."
"Be still. You're too rough."
"Sorry, but the secret is, I'm a little bit drunk."
"The police say you're really an insurance investigator," she said. "What are you looking for?"
"For this," he said. She jerked angrily away from him. He tried to grab her, but she jumped up, eluding him.
"Don't you understand?" she cried fiercely. "This union local is me. I try to run it straight, but if anything is wrong, I'm in trouble. I have to know where I stand."
Rip eyed her owlishly. "You have to know, and I have to have you."
"Then let's make a bargain. We can both get what we want."
She came back to him, pressing her body against him.
"You're my kind of man," she whispered. "But if you're trying to get me fired—"
"Hell, I never heard of you before," he said impatiently. "I'm here to hang a murder on Ace Bartlow, and another one on him and your inadequate bed partner, Frank Lyle. I don't give one happy hoot in hell about your union, your strippers, your call girl service, or you except for this, and this." He grinned vacuously as he slapped her buttocks, breasts, and crotch.
"Don't you care anything about money?"
she said quietly. "Honey, I don't give a crap about money," he said with a positive shake of his head. "But I love the hell out of things money can buy." He thought this uproariously funny and broke into loud laughter.
"There could be a lot of money, and the things it can buy, if you would sign that statement on Nancy Oxford's accidental death."
"How much?" he said bluntly. Too bluntly, perhaps, for she looked at him sharply. Finally, she said,
"Enough to afford me."
"There isn't that much in the world," he said loudly. "You're worth 10 zillion million at least."
"Will you do it?"
Rip hesitated. Liquor slowed down his thinking processes. One of the reasons he hated to drink while on the job. But no matter how drunk he got, he never lost his perspective. He idly massaged a big pink nipple and tried to figure out what to say. He intended to say yes, but was afraid too swift an agreement would tip her off that his answer was phony. "What in hell do you care about Nancy Oxford?" he said, faking irritability.
"You don't understand,"
she whispered, cuddling close as if to seek his protection.
"I used to be a stripper. You know what happens to most of them when their beauty starts to fade? I don't want to be a bum. I want to be somebody. This union job is my chance. Someday, I hope to be president of the National Union. If a scandal breaks now, it could ruin my chance forever."
"So keep the local clean. There can't be a scandal if there's nothing scandalous going on."
"You don't understand the pressure I'm under. I try to keep things as clean as I can, but there are things, terrible things, I admit, for I will not lie to you. They were here before I became business agent. I want to stamp them out, but I can't."
"Why not?"
"I'm afraid,"
she whispered, tears starting in her big violet eyes.
"You know they're killers."
"Just stick in my arms, honey, and you don't have to worry about those bastards." As soon as the words were out of his mouth, he felt a shock that almost sobered him. He had used almost identically the same words to Nancy Oxford, and then wasn't able to make good his boast. His eyes closed in pain as the grim picture of her dead body floated in his mind.
"There's $40,000 in that insurance policy on Nancy Oxford. Arrange so Bartlow can collect without a court contest, and I'll guarantee you half."
"The company'd fire me."
"Then come back here with me. 20,000 and me," she whispered eagerly. "I'll make a place for you in the union. I need a man I can depend upon. Together we can smash Bartlow and Lyle's hold over the local. This thing is a gold mine. Come with me. I'll guarantee you $100,000 a year to start. After that, the sky is the limit."
"Honey," Rip began, but the sudden opening of the front door cut him off. He felt Julie stiffen in his arms. He twisted around trying to see who the newcomer was. The couch cut off the view. He released his grip on the girl and reached for his pants. Across the room, the door slammed. Frank Lyle's heavy voice said, "Julie, where in hell are you?" Rip gave up the thought of getting dressed. He suspected that Lyle was the jealously possessive type. He grabbed the smoking stand beside the couch and leaped to his feet. Lyle grunted in surprise and jerked back. His hand shot to the police special holstered at his belt. Rip swept the smoking stand up in an underhand throw. Butts and ashes threw across the furniture. Lyle ducked back, sprawling heavily across an overstuffed chair. Rip hurtled the couch and slammed his bare heel down on the berserk cop's gun hand. Lyle squalled. He lashed out with his left foot, trying to drive the big shoe into Rip's loins. Desperately, Austin whipped his body around. He took the blow on his thigh. His leg collapsed. He fell on top of Lyle. The big cop threw a huge arm around Rip's neck, jerking him closer, and clubbed Austin's face. The first blow caught the insurance investigator over the eye. The skin broke. Blood dripped down Rip's face. He tried to knee his tormentor. He couldn't get his leg, numbed by the savage kick, to function properly. The other was imprisoned under Lyle's gross body. Lyle hit him again. Rip's head snapped back. Lyle lashed out again.
"Hit him! Smash the bastard! Kill him! Kill him!"
The high-pitched scream came from Julie Trevor. She stood against the wall watching the fighting men. Her naked body was rigid. Her hands were like claws sinking into her shivering breasts. Her face was twisted like a nymphomaniac in tortured ecstasy. Rip managed to grab Lyle's battering arm. For a moment they struggled, each at a disadvantage because of his position. Julie Trevor kept calling for murder. She seemed impartial and didn't care which one was winning or which one died. With both hands on Lyle's wrist, Rip was able to force the policeman's arm back in a painful twist. Lyle tried to get his other arm from around Rip's neck. The movement threw him off balance. Rip rammed the top of his head against the cop's face. Lyle bawled. Blood spattered from his smashed nose. The two men broke.
"You son of a bitch!"
Lyle's face was the mask of a murderer.
"I'll kill you!"
Julie Trevor's voice had sunk to a hoarse whisper.
"Kill him! Kill him!"
she said. The big man lunged at Rip. For all his grossness, Lyle was unusually light on his feet. He hit Austin with a football tackle. Rip tried to sidestep, but the alcohol had slowed his reflexes. As they fell, Rip jerked up his leg, making his knee the head of a hard spear against Lyle's belly. When they hit the floor, the big man's weight drove Rip's knee deep into his opponent's stomach. Lyle's breath exploded with an agonized gasp. He doubled up. His face turned green. His body jerked spasmodically as he struggled for breath. The room wheeled around him. For a second, all he could see was a blinding sea of painful flames. He pushed himself back, groaning in his agony. He knew that he was in no shape to fight anymore. He lacked the strength to knock out a fly. As soon as he could focus his pain-racked eyes, he looked around for the gun Lyle had dropped when he stomped his hand. He couldn't see it, and Lyle was forcing himself to his feet. For all the savage pain in his midriff, he was in better shape than Rip. Completely desperate now, for he knew that Lyle would kill him, Rip grabbed for the smoking stand that he had first thrown at the policeman. Blood flushed his brain as he stooped. He got his fingers on the heavy object, but lacked the strength to straighten up. He fell to his knees. Grunting painfully from his own agonized movements, Lyle lumbered toward him. Rip braced himself as best he could and swung the stand in a last desperate effort to keep the livid man from murdering him. It was a feeble swing. Lyle caught the heavy base. For one frantic moment, the two men struggled for possession of the weapon. Rip, braced by the floor, was in a more advantageous position. Lyle was pulled off balance. He started to fall. Austin snaked his body around to avoid being hit by the falling body of his enemy. Lyle lost his hold on the smoking stand as he fell. Rip jerked it back. Forcing his agonized body back to his knees, he hit Lyle on the base of the head. The policeman stretched out flat without even a groan. Rip sank to a sitting position, putting his elbows on his knees to support his bowed head. The awful throbbing in his tortured loins was starting to diminish somewhat, but the lessening pain there only revealed 1,001 other aches he didn't know he had. Julie Trevor came to him. She dropped on her knees beside him.
"Kill him,"
she whispered in a thick voice.
"Kill him."
He looked at her in amazement. She hadn't cared which one of them died as long as someone was murdered. He felt a fear of her. She's crazy as hell, he thought. End of chapter 4. Chapter 5 of Strip Wench or Die by Gene Cross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 5 The Lust of Julie Trevor. Rip got unsteadily to his feet.
"Kill the son of a bitch,"
Julie cried. "A minute ago you were screaming for him to kill me," he said fiercely. "Whose goddamn side are you on?" She was in such a frenzy she didn't hear him.
"Kill the rotten chiseling bastard,"
she cried. Rip hit her. It was a hard, stinging slap that rocked her head back. It knocked her against the wall. The nude painting slipped from its hook and crashed to the floor, narrowly missing her head. She shuddered. Some of the wild frenzy faded from her face. She looked from Austin to the unconscious Lyall as if she were seeing both for the first time. Her hands touched her breasts, slowly massaging them together. She said in a quiet voice,
"I was right. You are a better man than all of them. You'll win in the end, no matter how tough the fight."
He looked at her warily without saying anything. The way she rocketed from one mood to another made him uneasy. He trusted her like he trusted a rattlesnake. Her mouth half parted, her eyelids half drooped, her shoulders twisted, her big breasts heaved, her hips undulated. All her sex was in motion, wickedly, wantonly, lewdly inviting.
"You can take his place any time,"
she said. He both hated and feared her. Yet the salacious invitation of her obscene movements sent scalding fire surging through his body. He wanted to take her, crush her to him, and throw her on the floor. He fought down the mad impulse to start something he knew he was too weak to finish. Wordlessly, he stooped painfully to pick up his shorts. As he pulled them on, he looked up suddenly, surprising her with a very cold, speculative look on her face. He finished dressing. Several buttons were missing, stripped off in his passionate hurry to possess her. Then only did he turn to face her. She was cold, unfeeling, despite the show of writhing, groaning passion she had put on during their sexual session. He suspected that she was a genuine man-hater. She was something foul and probably half mad, if not completely crazy. Realizing full well what she was, it irritated him that she still had the power to stir him. Slowly she stooped and picked up her fallen robe. She pulled it primly around her. Rip felt a pang of disappointment to see her splendid flesh disappear from view. "There's not much point in hiding it now," he said. She smiled faintly.
"It's yours whenever you want it. You just have to ask."
"I like some love with my sex," he said shortly. The slightest suggestion of a frown creased her forehead. Her eyes snapped for the briefest moment. Then she seemed to lower an internal shade over her true thoughts.
"No man ever complained at the quality of the love I gave him,"
she said, just the faintest suggestion of acid in her voice. He walked over to her and gently untied the cord of her robe. She made no attempt to stop him. He ran his hand over her breasts, abdomen, and down. "That's because this is all they could see. The shell, baby. I can see beneath these delightful things."
"You don't like what you see there?"
she asked oddly. "I fear it," he said honestly. Instead of angering her, his reply pleased. She smiled.
"We understand each other," she said. "That is more important than love or lust in a lasting partnership. Think over my proposition. Remember, I offer you more money than you ever saw in your life. If it's sex you want, I can provide that. Myself, if you wish. Or if you want variety, you can have any girl in the union. Standing in line if you like them wholesale."
She came up close to him. Her hand touched him wantonly, lewdly caressing.
"And I think you do,"
she whispered. He gestured toward Lyall, groaning on the floor. "What about him?" he asked. Once he listened to just such a proposition. She shrugged.
"He and Bartlow grew too big for their pants. They think they own everything, including me. They think they can even get away with murder. The killing of Sally Vaughn was a bad mistake, done in crazy rage. Then they had to kill Nancy Oxford to shut her mouth. Now they have to kill you. And after you, it would be someone else. Once you start, there's no stopping."
"That's for sure," Rip said.
"I've got to break away from both of them. They'll drag down both the union and me."
"You could hang both if you'll talk." She gave him a contemptuous look.
"And break up the sweetest setup a woman ever had. To hell with you, bud. We'll leave the courts out of this. What I need is a man, a tough son of a bitch, one who loves money and whoring, one who will smash Bartlow and Lyall for me."
He began.
"Don't give me an answer now," she said. "Take time to think what there is in it for you."
Rip looked at her thoughtfully, wondering exactly how he should handle her. One thing was certain. It would be next to useless to put her on the stand in court. Obviously, she was trying to play both ends against the middle for her own benefit. He was saved from making a reply by Lyall raising his head. "You son of a bitch," he said painfully. "You attacked an officer of the law. I'll have you so far back in jail." "Cut it, Lyall," Rip snapped. "This little fracas was a private matter, and it had better stay private if you know what's good for you. You may think you got this county sewed up, but I intend to rip the seams out for you." "I'll get you, Austin," Lyall said, holding his sleeve to his still bleeding nose.
"You won't get away with this."
Rip shrugged. "Since three's a crowd," he said pleasantly to Julie, "I had better leave." He stopped at the first drugstore and put in a call to old Lavvy at Union Hall. "I want to talk to that girl, what's her name? The one who sings the Pussycat song," he said.
"Kooky Marsh?" the old woman said. "She's pretty good, they say, but she couldn't have held a candle to me when I was an Everleigh lady."
"Where does she live? I suppose she's home now." He looked at his watch. It was almost 10 a.m. That was practically the nightclub fraternity's midnight. She had an apartment, he found out, one that she had formerly shared with Nancy Oxford. When the old woman first mentioned Kooky Marsh, the name hit a familiar note in Rip's head. He was tired, sleepy. His head still ached from the punches he took from Lyall, and there was still enough alcohol in him to add an element of befuddlement. He couldn't quite place the name, but it worried him. He knew he should recall it, that it was important. Then, when she added the bit about sharing an apartment with Nancy Oxford, he remembered where he heard the name. Nancy had told him that Kooky Marsh witnessed the frightful beating that led to the death of Sally Vaughn.
"Say, buddy,"
the old woman's voice suddenly sounded cautious.
"Yeah?"
Rip said.
"Can anybody hear what we're talking about?"
"I'm in a payphone booth."
"Good. Now, you listen to me. Do you hear?"
"I hear."
"They're gonna get you."
"Oh, no."
"Oh, yes."
"No, they just think they're going to get me."
"Well, they're rolling out the heavy guns. You want to hear about it?"
"I sure do."
"Ace Bartlow was just in here to line up his show for next week. Lyall called him. I listened in on the extension."
She paused and said lamely,
"It's not ladylike to eavesdrop, but I'm no lady anymore. But by God, I was once. Don't forget that. Well, anyway, the upshot of the conversation's that they're importing a couple of muscle men from Chi to take care of you."
"Not men enough to do it themselves, huh?"
"They want to be seen elsewhere when you go under. Alibi's the word for it."
"Miss LaRue,
Maggie to you."
Okay, Maggie, when I make $1 million, the first thing I'm going to do is buy you a gold piano. It will be just like the one the Everleigh sisters had in their parlor."
"You got the idea. Why don't we team up and open a real old-fashioned whorehouse? These call girls today just don't have it."
"Can't, Maggie. And for the same reason, I can't ever be a bartender. I'd spend too much time sampling the merchandise. Thanks for the tip. I won't forget it." Austin was thoughtful as he hung up the phone. The imported killers added a new element to his already top-heavy troubles. Finally, he shrugged. They were a bridge he would cross when he came to it. In the meantime, there was the immediate problem of Kooky Marsh. For one thing, she was the girl detailed to provide the sexual payment demanded by Billy Kirk for his false testimony about Austin's drinking. That charge of drunk driving and negligent homicide was something he had to get out of the way before he could seriously settle down to rounding up the girl's killers. He had a hunch that the big-breasted little dancer might be just the lever he needed to prise Billy Kirk's testimony out of his way. "I'd better go see this Kooky," he told himself. Before driving out, Rip stopped for some breakfast. He had not eaten since the previous night. He started to take a booth in the small lunchroom on the main drag, but he happened to notice that the girl sipping a Coke at the counter was the same one who had passed him in the Union Hall.
"Private stuff,"
old Lavvy had told him. He stared at her profile. It was young, fresh, and extremely feminine. There was a childish quality about her face that was belied by the delightful swell that strained her tight sweater. He dropped his eyes, nodding approvingly at the way the tight skirt outlined the perfect curve of her hips. Her lithe legs tapered down to trim ankles. She had that combined kiddishness and passionate sexiness that is the stock in trade of sex-kitten French actresses. "I wonder just how private that stuff really is," Rip muttered to himself. He changed his mind about the booth and slipped onto the empty stool beside her. She didn't look at him. He also ignored her. He ordered a stack with maple syrup and watched the interesting rear view of the waitress as she swayed off to give his order to the cook. He turned back as she disappeared behind the swinging door. As he did, his eyes caught the girl's reflection in the back counter mirror. She was watching him with big round blue eyes. When their eyes met there in the reflections, she colored and looked down at her Coke. Rip kept his face blank, but inwardly he was gleefully satisfied. "Oh, she's interested," he told himself. "Well, what a coincidence, because I'm interested too." He waited a moment for her to compose herself after her embarrassment at him catching her watching him in the mirror. Then he turned casually. "Didn't I see you over at the Union Hall? he said pleasantly. "If you're a member of the union, that makes us sort of partners. She gave him a half-startled look. Then, snatching up her half-drunk Coke, she slipped off the stool. She walked hurriedly to the door, sipping the drink through the straw. She sat the nearly empty glass down on the booth table nearest the door, shooting one quick look back at him before she left. Rip sighed. The waitress looked at him in amusement.
"Too young for you," she said. "What you need is the more mature type."
"What's more mature than what was pushing that sweater out?" he mumbled, pouring syrup on the hot cake she put before him. "Come to think of it, wasn't that movie Sweater Girl discovered sipping a Coke or something?"
"Don't tell me you're a movie scout."
"No, I'm with the Club Dancers Union."
"Oh,"
she said. "Is it that bad?"
"Find out for yourself. It doesn't pay to talk too much in this county."
He digested that in silence. When he finished eating, he shoved a $5 bill across to her, waving away the change. Climbing back in the rental car, Rip started for Kooky Marsh's place. It was a walk-up apartment. He scanned the mailboxes. One was marked Jean Marsh 2B. As he climbed the stairs, he tried to plan his approach to her, but had difficulty keeping his mind on the problem. Julie Trevor and the sweater girl kept revolving in his mind. Together, they pushed out everything else in his mind. They were still revolving like twin suns in his brain when he pushed the bell. Figuring a girl in her profession hadn't gotten to bed, to sleep, that is, until at least 6 or 7 in the morning, he leaned on the bell. He was rewarded by a blast of sulphurous language from inside the room. The door was flung open. A tiny woman glared furiously at him. She was about 5'2", but with breasts that would have been adequate on a woman twice her size. They seemed to push her robe out a foot in front of her. The deep V of the robe's neck revealed enough to convince Rip that they were real, too. She had a pug nose and full sexy lips. Wide blue eyes paced the pert face. She gave the impression of kittenish cuteness rather than outstanding beauty. Sizing her up quickly, Rip could see where her looks and personality would be perfect for the Pussycat song Billy Kirk claimed was her specialty.
"What in hell do you want at this ungodly hour?"
she snapped. "I'm Rip Austin.
"Oh, yeah,"
she said, tossing her hands up in disgust.
"I've heard the name. You're the organizer they sent down from national headquarters. So what do you want, as if I didn't know?"
"May I come in?"
"How can I keep you out?"
she snapped.
"Why do all the freeloaders pick on me? Last night it was that son of a bitch Bartlow. Today it's you, and tonight some punk kid Bartlow owes a debt to. And not a dime for poor little Kooky and the whole damn carload. Don't you horny bastards think I need money? I gotta eat. I got rent to pay. I got clothes to buy. And how the hell am I gonna get coin if I'm forced to keep giving away my merchandise?"
"Tone it down, honey," Rip suggested with a grin. "The landlord will be trying to break your lease." She shrugged.
"Everybody in this flea trap is a whore. Those who don't collect in cash peddle it for flattery, a drink, and a cheap show. What in hell's the difference, I ask you?"
"None, I guess," Rip said. "But you can smile again. I didn't come for free merchandise."
"Don't make me laugh. None of you sorry union bastards ever gave a girl a dime. It's all take and no give with you."
He eased himself down on the arm of a chair. "Kooky, get this straight. I know how the boys impose on you girls, but I'm not one of the boys. I'm here to get Bartlow and Lyle. Bartlow killed Sally Vaughn in a fit of rage because she bucked their compulsory prostitution racket. They rigged it to look like an accident. Since Lyle does the homicide investigation up here, they thought they were safe."
"Who in hell are you?"
she said, her face suddenly frozen. "I'm the one little fact the murderers look over," he said. "I'm the insurance investigator. Our company is on the hook for $40,000 if they can make the accident gag stick. We intend to prove it murder." Kooky took a deep breath. It was too much for the restraining robe. One huge breast popped out. A red cherry nipple bobbed saucily at Rip.
"Back in there, you!"
Kooky snapped, pulling the robe back over the lush curves. Then she looked up at Rip. Her expression was that of an abashed little girl.
"Sorry," she said, "but it's not really my fault. Sometimes I think the damn things have a life of their own. I belong to them instead of the other way around."
"I don't know anything nicer to belong to," Rip said.
"I know," she said, wrinkling her pug nose. "I got no illusions. The Johns don't come to see me because I sing pretty. I know where my talent lies. If I ever became a famous movie star, I'm going to be honest when they take me down to Grauman's Chinese. Instead of my footprints, I'm going to leave my breast marks in the concrete."
Rip laughed. Kooky came over and perched daintily on his knees. Taking his hands in hers, she gently guided his fingers up inside her robe and across the firm beauty of her greatest talent.
"Look, honey," she said huskily, "I like you, but I gotta get my beauty sleep or I'll go to sleep right in the middle of my act tonight. So, come on into bed. Let's get it over with."
Rip took a last squeeze of her huge nipples before reluctantly withdrawing his hands. "Honey," he said with a sour grin, "you wouldn't be trying to use your talent to get my mind off business. Now I can't think of any better way to sleep than with my head bolstered by those overstuffed pillows. But I'm old-fashioned, baby. When we hit the sheets, it'll only be when you want to, not have to." She got up slowly and walked half across the room before she whirled around to face him.
"Well,"
she said slowly, wrinkling her forehead as if it was painful for her to think deeply.
"I sort of would like to. You're the sort of big, good-looking bastard I go for. God knows, in my business, I generally draw the fat, bald-headed type who drool over my little girl type. I don't get much good out of that. It's been so goddamn long since I did it just purely for fun."
"Kooky, they have you girls trapped in a net of fear. String along with me and I'll rip that net to pieces for you." She looked at him solemnly.
"In my business, it's part of the stock in trade to tell every man you're falling for him. Well, I'm not creaming my pants over you, but I like you. I like everything about you. And you're welcome to drop in for a free sample any time you want. But,"
"Yeah?" he said when she paused.
"because I like you, I'm going to tell you something. You haven't got the chance of a virgin in a whorehouse of getting away with this. Forget it. Let's go to bed."
"Will you help me?"
"No. I saw what happened to one girl who—"
She broke off with a gasp, realizing she had said too much. "I'm not asking you to put yourself out on a limb," he said. "Will you promise me this? If I can get them backed against the wall where they can't hurt you, will you—"
"You can't do it."
"Then tell me what happened to Sally. If I know all the facts, I can dig up my own supporting evidence."
"I'd like to. Believe me, I hate those sons of bitches. You just don't understand, I'm afraid. I shiver whenever one of them gets near me."
"Okay," he said, realizing he could not expect to push her too rapidly. "Think it over. In the meantime, you've got an unpaid date with a young punk tonight. Don't be surprised if I show up too. I intend to break it up."
"Please," she whispered hoarsely, "don't get me in trouble."
"Don't worry. Ace knows I'm after this Kurt kid because he's giving false evidence about me. He won't tie you into it."
"What are you going to do?"
"I don't know. It depends on the hand," he said. "I'll be seeing you."
"Wait,"
she said. He stopped with his hand on the doorknob. She put her arms around his neck.
"Kiss me,"
she said. "Why?"
"That's the first time I ever had a man ask me that," she snapped. "If you must know, I want to see if it is as nice as I think it'll be."
She was so tiny her head came only to his chest. He swung her up off the floor, pulling her small, yet very mature, body against him. The crush of her huge breasts against his chest caused his entire body to tingle. Their lips brushed together lightly. Then her arms tightened around his neck, her lips crushed against his, eagerly, hungrily, and then violently. Insistently, her tongue tried to pry its sensual way between his lips. For a moment he fought against it before letting her have her way. She broke away, gasping for breath.
"Don't go,"
she whispered. "I must," he replied, gently disengaging her arms. "But I'll see you tonight."
"If you live that long,"
she said sadly. From Cooky's apartment he drove to Union Hall. Old Lavvy greeted him very formally.
"Good morning, sir," she said. "Is there something I can do for you?"
At the same time, she tipped him a precautionary wink and jerked her head toward a closed door that opened off the small reception room. As if on signal, the door opened. Julie Trevor came out. She was a far cry from the woman he left at her home. By some miracle, she had become a well-tailored, perfectly coiffured young businesswoman. However, the severe lines of her mannish suit could not hide the strip-teaser's voluptuousness underneath.
"Oh, Mr. Austin,"
she said brightly, striding gracefully across the room to offer him her hand. "Just call me Rip," Austin said quietly. "Somehow I feel as if we were old friends." There was just the slightest suggestion of acid in his tones. A faint tightening of the corners of her mouth was her only sign of anger at his dig.
"Lavvy,"
she said to the old tart.
"this is Mr. Rip Austin.
National headquarters sent him down to work with us for a while.
Lavvy looked at him without reply. Finally, she grunted and turned back to her work.
"What are you doing?"
Julie asked Rip. "Getting acquainted," he replied.
"Well,"
she said, uncertain of herself. Then brightening, she said,
"Why not come in? I'm breaking in 2 new girls. A lot of shows just depend upon girls taking their clothes off. That's no novelty around here. Our girls have to have something extra. I trained them myself."
"But where did you learn?"
"That's none of your damn business,"
she snapped. He smiled, reaching out to pat the smooth lines of her buttocks. She dropped her eyelids, but not fast enough for him to miss the "I've got you hooked, sucker" gleam that came to her eyes. In her towering egotism, she did not feel that he could resist her undoubted charm.
"Go in the audition room. I must change into my work clothes," she said.
Rip hesitated. Watching a school for strippers had its attractions, but he reminded himself that he had work to do. But as he considered, he admitted that cultivating Julie Trevor might produce dividends in the end. "You're rationalizing," he accused himself as he walked toward the door. "You want to stay, and you just sought an excuse." He brushed away the accusing voice of conscience with the impatient reply that he would only stay a minute. Then he intended to seek out Martin Whiteley, the local insurance agent who tipped off 7Cs that there was something phony in Sally Vaughn's death. He pushed open the door. 2 girls turned, startled by the intrusion. One was a willowy, big-bosomed girl made from the usual stripper's mold. The second one was the sex kitten he had frightened away in the lunchroom. The first girl eyed him boldly, obviously liking what she saw. The second dropped her eyes. A faint flush stained her cheeks. It was becoming, but Rip wondered how anyone so modest would succeed as a stripper. But after a careful eyeful of her curvy body, he decided that she might be an outstanding success after all. Perhaps if she just took off her clothes and stood in the spotlight blushing, it would be more sexily exciting than the other girls' bumps and grinds. End of Chapter 5.
Chapter 6 of Strip Wench or Die by Gene Cross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 6 Foul Woman. "Jenny, dear, come help Mama," Julie called from an adjoining room. The sex kitten turned reluctantly, her flush darkened. She did not look at Rip. He watched her trim behind until she disappeared through the door. The bold-eyed girl who remained came over to Austin. She perched on the arm of his chair and turned his head with her hands. He had continued to stare at the door through which the girl had gone.
"Come down to earth, honey,"
she said, her voice low.
"She's not your type. Neither of those bitches are."
"Who is my type? You?"
"Could be, sweet."
The door opened. The girl moved back hastily to put as much space as possible between Rip and herself. Rip came to his feet in surprise. Julia Trevor stood in the doorway. She looked like something from Mae West's past. She wore a picture hat with ostrich plume. Her waist was pinched in, which made her already large breasts loom up magnificently. Her gown swept all the way to the floor, and she wore elbow-length white gloves.
"Jenny, dear,"
she said back over her shoulder to the quiet girl,
"put the record on like a sweet girl."
The girl silently crossed the room, pulling the blinds behind Rip. She did not look at him as she went by. Julia watched the way Rip's eyes followed her, and the way the girl studiously ignored him. When the room was darkened, the girl Jenny touched a switch, and a spot concealed in the ceiling hit Julie with a shaft of pale blue light. Humming softly to the rhythm of a slow trombone from the record, she artfully stripped her gloves. Her face was icily aloof. She seemed unaware that there was anyone else in the room. The gloves dropped, white splashes on the dark floor. The 2 girls sank down cross-legged on the floor. Rip shot a quick glance at Jenny. The girl had her chin in her hands, staring like one hypnotized at the beautiful vision from the gay 90s.
"I'm just an old-fashioned lady,"
Julie sang softly to the music. She paused for 2 beats, and then her voice rang out with husky sexiness.
"But I'd like to be your red-hot baby."
By some magical manipulation of her zippers, the entire dress fell away from her. She kept singing, but Rip was no longer following the words. The black lace vision filled his brain, crowding out everything else. Long, sinuous legs were tantalizingly sheathed in black net, which terminated at a frothy line of piled-up scarlet lace fringing the bottom of midnight-colored silk. This black garment hugged her body like skin. It was so tight one could see the outlines of her crotch when her wicked gyrations kicked up the piling lace. It hugged her tiny waist and swept up over the bottom curves of her swelling breasts. Thick scarlet lace trimmed the top as well, but only half hid her bosom. She threw her head back. Her eyes closed. She shivered and raised her arms high. The effect lifted her breasts so that they suddenly popped over the lace froth. She cried out and simulated agony, and the twin mounds of curving flesh bounced in wild abandon. She whirled around. The rounded buttocks shook a bold challenge. Slowly the pagan quivering died away. She turned back to face Rip. Long lashes half-veiled her eyes. He could hear the sobbing of her breath. She seemed to have forgotten him again. She did not move except for the barely perceptible hunch of her hips in time to a lazy drumbeat. The music increased in tempo, and the lewd shift of her hips matched it until both were slipping across the civilized line into a barbaric orgy. Slowly the black silk started to slip. She pushed it down until the entire garment was a tangle of scarlet and black across her loins. And then, with a wicked flourish, that too was gone. Completely nude, she jerked and writhed, quivered and bumped. There was nothing subtle now. She was taking her sex and throwing it at him. The music rose to a crescendo. The music of her fluid body matched it note for note, and the two ended together in a quivering duet of flesh and sobbing trumpets. Suddenly, Julie put her hands on her hips and laughed. She pointed to Rip.
"That's the idea, girls. Move the lustful bastards right out on the edge of their seats."
Rip grinned sheepishly. He had not realized that this was exactly what he was doing. He moved back in his seat.
"Okay, Mavis," Julie said, suddenly businesslike again. "You take it from there."
The student stripper gathered up the fallen garments and retired to dress. Jenny brought Julie a robe. The wanton woman slipped into it, but didn't seem to care whether it was fastened or not. Mavis went through the routine several times before Julie was satisfied. She was followed by Jenny, who practiced a clever bullfighting strip devised by Julie. There was a papier-mâché bull's head, and the girl's Spanish costume was removed piece by piece on the horns of the bull. She was beautifully formed, but was not as voluptuous as Julie and Mavis. But she had one precious asset they lacked: freshness. The act proceeded smoothly to the point where the girl had only a frilly pair of black lace panties remaining. She stopped.
"Well, go on,"
Julie snapped.
I can't go any further with him looking at me,"
she said in a low voice.
"Hell, he's just a John," Julie said impatiently. "When you get in the spotlight, there'll be hundreds of them out front." "I know, but hell, take it off."
Rip turned to Julie in protest. What he saw in her face stopped him. Her eyes gleamed with a strange light. She was breathing heavily through a half-parted mouth. Her breast heaved. Rip got a horrified impression of a feminine version of an old Rue in the bald-headed row. "Take it off!" Julie cried thickly, and then Rip understood what old Lavvy had meant by queer things which went on in Julie's home. Slowly fighting back the tears that scalded her eyes, Jenny turned, hooking the tiny black ring on the tip of the bull's horns. She made a slight movement, and the trick garment ripped away. She stood in the spotlight, stark naked, every part of her pink with embarrassment. Julie sucked in her breath as her eyes lewdly devoured the blushing girl. Suddenly, Jenny snatched the dress from the bull's left horn. Holding it against her, she ran from the room. The three of them stared after her for a brief second. Mavis's face mirrored amused contempt. Julie was the picture of lewdest lust. Rip Austin felt only pity. A heavy sigh shook Julie's voluptuous body. She got up but did not bother to pull the robe tight around her. Through the gap, Rip glimpsed a long stretch of satiny skin reaching from a pointed breast down past her thigh. Despite the foulness he suspected in her warped sexual desires, that all-revealing peak stirred him. His face flushed, and he churned with anger at himself. He suddenly felt sick in the stomach as he looked at her full-blown lips. He thought of the way he had crushed their passionate hotness against his own, unknowing that they were play-acting and got their own thrills from lewd kissing and mouthings of her own kind. But mixed with his hate was a thin red thread of fear. The hungry fire in his loins would not go out. Even knowing what she was, his body hungered for hers. Suddenly, he could contain himself no longer. He knew he had to get out of the room and away from her. To stay long would cause him to lose control of himself. He would either rape her or drive his fist into her face. Either action would probably be disastrous. He needed her until the case was broken. After that... He turned suddenly and strode to the door. "Wait!" she cried sharply. He paused, hating himself for it.
"What's the hurry?"
she asked. "I've got work to do," he said shortly. "Remember, I go before the court tomorrow to answer that trumped-up charge your buddies are trying to stick me with."
"Have you thought about my proposition?"
"You'll pardon me if I seem suspicious of it. You never saw me before this morning. Now you want to make me a life partner. Just what kind of fool do you take me for?"
"You're smart," she said. "I wouldn't want you if you weren't. So why did I pick you? One thing I've learned, and well learned, I might add, is to judge men. I don't expect you to rush blindly into this. Think about it. Let it grow on you. Learn to trust me. It'll take time."
"It doesn't take much thought to know I'd be a high-powered pimp. That's not for me. I got some self-respect." She made an impatient gesture.
"That's what is wrong with Lyle and Bartlow. All they can see in this union racket is selling the girls' bodies. That's a byproduct. It's okay in the beginning when you must have quick money to finance operations, but the big money, the millions, Rip Austin, is in getting control of the National Union with its power for big-time shakedowns and its juicy welfare fund."
"Julie, you'll never do it."
"The hell I won't. I started as a goddamn stripper just like these girls. Where are they now? Cheap, lousy whores. And me, I head the union. I can do the same thing on a national scale. All I need is money to buy the right people and a man to back me up with the strong-arm stuff when necessary."
Lyle and Bartlow seem like the answer to your prayer. I suspect Ace has some good mafia connections, too. She shrugged off the idea impatiently.
"Those two small-time bastards can't see beyond the county line. No imagination. I need a man with guts and ambition."
"I'm not so sure you need a man at all," he said slowly. "You may have learned to judge men, as you claim, but in my business I've had to learn to judge women just as well."
"I've got the brains, the ambition, the know-how. But a woman has 2 strikes against her in the business world. She needs a strong man backing her up."
"Julie."
"Now, don't go yelling no yet. Think it over. Think what I'm offering you. And if the nookie racket worries you, I promise I'll kill it just as soon as we're financially able. It's small peanuts to what I'm planning."
"Julie."
"I'll give you money, women, power. What else does a man want? I'll make you somebody in this goddamn lousy chiseling world."
"What else does a man want?" he repeated slowly. He knew the answer to that. Self-respect. But he prudently did not say it aloud. "I'll think about it, Julie," he said gravely.
"Good," she said. "Where are you going now?"
"To get some sleep. It's been 30 hours since I had a wink."
"Need an eye-opener when you wake up? I'll send one of the girls around. How about Mavis? What she lacks in experience, she makes up in enthusiasm."
Rip looked at the floor so she would not see his eyes. "How about the other one? Jenny?" Julie stiffened. Her voice turned frigid.
"She's otherwise engaged."
"Later, maybe?"
"She'll be otherwise engaged then, too," Julie snapped.
"I like her type."
"The matter is settled."
He shrugged. "I'll be seeing you," he said. As he went out through the lobby, old Lavy crooked a finger at him. She said in a low voice,
"The rods from Chai are getting into the San Francisco International Airport at 9:30 tonight. At an hour and a half drive down here, and the bastards will be in by midnight anyway."
"What's their angle?"
"A snatch to start. They don't want you to show up for the preliminary hearing. The DA will claim you jumped bail because you knew you were guilty. Then you'll be quietly dropped in the ocean for the sharks to take care of."
"Thanks," he said.
"What are you going to do?"
He shrugged.
"You better get away from here until the hearing."
"I'm not the running kind," he said. He returned to the motel and left a call at the desk for midnight. When the phone awakened him, he rolled unhappily out of bed. He rummaged a bottle from his bag and took one small drink. Reluctantly, he screwed the top back on the bottle. His head hurt. His body ached in 100 places. He was just beginning to feel the effects of his brawl with Lyle. He showered, and when that didn't clear up his fogginess, he reluctantly took another drink. A stiffer one this time. He felt a little better, and by the time he drove to the county line, the night air in combination with the liquor had brought some semblance of life back to him. He parked in the lot at the Pussycat Club and asked at the door for Ace Bartlow.
"Mr. Bartlow is in San Francisco," the pretty cashier told him. "He's meeting some friends from the East."
"They're friends of mine, too," Rip said. I want to see them. When is Ace expected back?
Any time now. Would you like to wait? We have a new floor show tonight. Kooky Marsh, who has been a big hit at the clubs in Peninsulaville.
Yeah? Rip said, poker-faced. What happened to the girl who was here? What was her name? Nancy Oxford?
She had an accident last night.
Oh, well, I guess I will catch the show. He stepped behind a potted palm and gently eased the .38 from his shoulder holster. He slipped it into his jacket pocket. When the head waiter appeared, he said, I want a table back from the stage. The waiter looked surprised. Most of his customers demanded tables close enough to view the stripper's pores. But he deftly pocketed the 20 Rip slipped him. Austin was conducted to a table at the very back of the room. It commanded a good view of the door. Rip nodded and ordered a Tom Collins. A sick comedian had the spotlight. A drunk was heckling him from the audience. To Rip's practiced ear, it seemed that the drunk was much the funnier of the two. When the sad routine finally dragged to a close, a breath of life ran through the audience. Rip could feel the eager anticipation. The MC grabbed the mic as if to keep himself from falling on his face. Turning a vacuous grin at the audience, he started his introduction of Kooky Marsh. The girl who's made the biggest bust this little town has ever seen. He turned and waved toward the wings. Kooky stepped into the spotlight, wearing what for Peninsulaville was very prim dancing tights. She struck a pose, and the MC said, Here she is, Kooky Marsh, the girl who's busting out all over. Kooky waved, and the movement of her hand pulled an invisible thread woven through eyes and the top of her costume. On cue, as the MC said, busting out, her huge breasts popped out of the frilly lace, saucily waving at the audience. She threw her hands in the air and gave a scream of pure delight that made the room ring. Her shoulders writhed, and her bust went into such violent contortions that Rip was almost convinced that she would bust out if she didn't stop. When she stopped, the MC owlishly eyed her protruding attractions. Are those things real? He asked incredulously. For answer, Kooky took his hand and rubbed it across the nipples.
Now do you believe?
She said with mock anger. His knees wobbled. His eyes rolled up to the ceiling and gasped, They are real! The audience laughed. Kooky pouted, pointing to a paunchy bald head at a ringside table.
He doesn't believe,
she cried in mock rage. Tripping lightly down to the table, she thrust her breasts right against his face, rubbing them tightly against him. She jumped back laughing as the audience roared. Dozens of voices yelled that they didn't believe either. Feigning anger at their doubt, Kooky started circulating among the tables. Hurry up, gents, and prove to yourself they're real, the MC said. And then don't go away, folks. As Al Jolson would say if he were here, you ain't seen nothing yet. Kooky has a real gasser cooked up for you, Kookies. A do-it-yourself strip. She'll be back in a costume made of ribbons. Every ribbon is for sale, and the cost is 1 sip of champagne for Kooky. Every ribbon goes if you got the giggle water. Oh, and I forgot, on the back of each ribbon is a number. One of these numbers is a winner, boys. And what do you win? A private visit to Kooky's dressing room. He paused and leered. And what goes on in the dressing room, Kooky? The spot picked out the girl with a dozen hands outstretched to test the validity of her charms. What goes on in your dressing room, Kooky?
Nothing goes on, you damn fool,
the girl retorted, shaking her body.
It comes off.
The crowd roared, but Rip was no longer noticing. His attention was riveted on 3 men who had just entered the club. One was Ace Bartlow. He could tell nothing about the others except that they were flashily dressed. Come back to the office, Ace said. We'll settle the details, and then you can go down to the game room if you wish. We have 2 wheels, a dice table, and a blackjack set up in the basement. Rip waited until they were out of sight. Then he got up quietly and worked himself around the edge of the room. As he pushed through the curtain himself, his hand slipped to his pocket. He took considerable comfort in the feel of the .38's butt in his hand. He moved quickly along a dark corridor. A dressing room opened off to the left. A stark-naked girl leaned against a table, hungrily puffing a cigarette. A male employee was stretched on the couch, lewdly ogling her. He moved on, stopping in front of a door marked Manager. He slipped the gun from his pocket as he grasped the doorknob. He hesitated. His jaw tightened. He realized full well the enormous risk he took bursting in on the 3 gangsters. He took a deep breath and suddenly pushed the door open. 3 hands shot to shoulder holsters, but paused under the deadly threat of the gun in Austin's hand. Perhaps it was more than the gun that stopped them. The cold, straight stare of the man behind the gun told them that they were dealing with a man who would not hesitate to shoot. "Lift them just a little bit, boys," he said coldly. Grimly, their cautious eyes seeking the first sign of weakness in their captor, the trio slowly raised their hands. "Turn around," Rip said. They slowly complied. He took a quick step toward them, then realized with a shock that the reflection in a glassed picture frame was giving his movements away. He stepped back, sweating a little at the narrow escape. If he had moved in as he intended to knock out the two gangsters, Ace Bartlow, seeing his movement in advance, would have had the opportunity to jump him from the side. He forced them to turn toward the door. He moved the gun so it covered Ace Bartlow's back. With his other hand, he reached for a desk-style cigarette lighter made in the form of an antique flintlock pistol. The inch-thick softness of the rug muffled his movements as he suddenly brought the heavy lighter across the backs of the two gangsters' heads with a swift 1-2 slash. Bartlow whirled, his hand stabbing for his shoulder holster. Austin was too fast for him. The barrel of the .38 rammed deep in the club manager's belly. Bartlow grunted painfully. The gun dropped from his fingers. He backed up against the wall, his face was white, and he half-stooped from the pain of Austin's brutal blow. Rip removed the guns from the shoulder holsters of the two unconscious men. He added them to the one Ace Bartlow dropped. "You can't get away with this," Bartlow said thickly. "It's all I can do to keep from putting a bullet through your goddamn head as it is," Rip said grimly. "Don't push me too far, you filthy son of a bitch. The only thing I hate worse than a murderer is a bastardly pimp. And when they're combined in one..." Bartlow nervously licked his lips. "Maybe we can make a deal, Austin," he began. "I'm willing to drop the negligence homicide charge against you." For answer, Rip picked up the phone from Bartlow's desk. He jerked the dial around to call the operator. "This is Rip Austin. I want to make a person-to-person call to California Attorney General in Sacramento. Charge the call to..." He read the number from Bartlow's phone. "This is urgent official business. Call his home. If he isn't there, track him down." "What the hell are you up to?" Bartlow said, alarm showing in his sallow face.
Operator 3 will call you,
the phone girl said. "Nothing doing," Rip snapped. "This is urgent, didn't I tell you? I can't wait. Cut in on the lines if necessary."
But sir, this is very irregular.
"Listen, if you can't complete the call, give me the telephone company's supervisor."
Yes, sir. 1 moment, please.
There were a series of clicks on the line, and a courteous voice said,
May I help you? This is the night supervisor.
"This is Rip Austin of 7 Seas Insurance. I'm trying to complete an urgent official call to the Attorney General. I have an urgency code 5D.
Oh, in that case, let me check our records. It will only take a minute,
the supervisor said.
You should have told the operator you had an urgency code. She would have switched you to me at once.
There was a slight pause, and then Rip was told,
Your call is going through, sir.
"Good," Rip said. "I want this a conference call, and Frank Lyall of the Peninsulaville Police on the line when I talk to the Attorney General. You can probably get him at Julie Trevor's local number." Lyall came on the line first.
"What in hell is this?"
he said heavily. "Just hang on," Rip said grimly. "You're going to talk to the Attorney General."
"Austin, why you..."
He broke off when the state official came on the line.
"What is this?"
the AG asked. "This is Rip Austin of 7 Seas Insurance. You remember we worked together on that plane bombing case in L.A. 3 years ago. Well, I got a hot tip that could cause you some embarrassment with an election coming on. That's the reason I disturbed you at this ungodly hour."
"Don't worry about disturbing me. What is it?"
"Eastern gangsters are trying to muscle in on the gambling racket over in Peninsulaville. Opposition newspapers are onto it and will probably break the story tomorrow. It'll be a feather in your cap if you break up the play first."
"Who are they?"
"I recognized one. He's Bugsy Dial, who was run out of L.A. for trying to muscle in down there a couple of years ago. I don't know the other. But here's the deal. Both showed up at the Pussycat Club at the Peninsula County line and started pushing the manager Ace Bartlow around." Rip grinned over at Bartlow, who looked like he was about to strangle. "Both men," Rip went on, "were healed. So, knowing for sure that Bugsy could never get a license to carry a gun in this state, I tagged both of them and have them in custody. Citizen's arrest, you know. Any citizen can arrest a lawbreaker found in commission of a crime, and I consider it a violation of the law to carry an unregistered concealed weapon."
"That's good enough for me,"
the state official said.
"What are you going to do with them?"
They violated a state law. It's up to you to prosecute. I'm turning them and the guns over to Frank Lyall of the Peninsulaville Police with orders to hold them for you. Lyall is on the extension with me. He doesn't think the city police should feed state prisoners."
Lyall!
There was a silence from the other line. Then Lyall said,
Yeah?
His voice was so choked with rage he could scarcely speak.
Look, I'm not going to have the opposition clawing the hell out of me for babying Eastern hoodlums. You stick those two bastards in the can and hold them for me. And God help you if they get loose. I'm calling the newspapers now and giving them a story about me heading off a gangster infiltration of the state.
Then before he hung up, the state official said,
"And thanks, Austin. Call me if I can do you a favor any time."
"Thanks, but I don't need any help at the moment. I'm just about ready to break a couple of raw murders. So long." Austin grinned at Bartlow's stricken face. "The trouble with you," he said genially, "is that you forgot you were picking on somebody from the big time." He shifted the gun to his left hand and took a grim step toward Bartlow. "I told the AG you were being roughed up. I'd better make it look good," he said.
"Don't hit me!"
Ace cried, cringing back against the wall. He threw his hands up over his face. Grinning savagely, Rip rammed the pistol barrel into his stomach again. Ace bent double, his hands dropping to his abdomen. Rip straightened him up with an uppercut. Ace Bartlow's head banged back against the wall. His knees buckled. He slipped to the floor, falling across one of the gangsters. Rip switched off all the lights except one on the desk. He directed its glow so he could see any movement of the unconscious men. Then he raised the Venetian blind to watch for the lights of Lyall's car. The three were up by the time the crooked policeman arrived. Rip, taking the precaution of covering Lyall with the .38, waved his hand toward the three men. "All yours," he said. "The guns for evidence are in the desk drawer. You can take them after I leave."
"What kind of a frame is this?" Bugsy Dial asked, looking from Ace to Lyall. "Somebody back in Chide's gonna be goddamn mad."
"There's nothing I can do. You'll have to square it with Sacramento," Lyall said shortly. Then to Rip, he added, "You haven't got long to live, punk." End of Chapter 6. Chapter 7 of Strip Wench or Die by Gene Cross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 7 Kooky Love. As he backed out the door, Austin did not doubt the seriousness of Lyall's threat. The country was well organized. The importation of Chicago hoodlums had been an attempt to keep any taint of what happened to Austin from being attacked locally. But now that the gloves were off, Austin knew they had to hit him with everything they had. He glanced at the luminous dial of his watch. He had been on the peninsula just 30 minutes less than 24 hours. "Well," he said to himself as he shoved the gun in his pocket, but prudently kept his hand on the butt, "if I can hang on another 24, the whole mess should be rolled up in one little ball of dung." At the end of the corridor, he looked back. The door of Ace's office was still closed. He grinned as he imagined the bitter arguments being put up by the imported gangsters and Lyall's embarrassment. There was no way Lyall could let them go without bringing down the wrath of the Attorney General on his head. In the spot, Kooky Marsh was twisting her completely bare body in a frenzied finale to her act. She threw her arms high in the air and gave one final bump. Then she ran off stage. Rip stepped back inside the curtain that separated the corridor from the club dining room. As Kooky burst through, he caught her around the waist and swung her around. She gasped and started to push away.
"Get in line with your $100 bill,"
she snapped.
"I'm giving nothing away except a peep."
"A credit card, too?" Rip asked with a grin.
"Oh,"
she said and stopped struggling.
"You. Sorry, when I first come out from that damn spot, I can't see a thing for 10 minutes.
"I haven't much time," Rip said. "Where are you supposed to meet Billy Kirk?"
"At the motel across the street,"
she replied. "I'll be there."
"Don't get me in trouble,"
she whispered back. At 3 a.m., Kooky left the club. Rip, who had been sitting in the car watching for her, watched her cross the highway to the plush motel. When she was out of sight, he followed. She entered the second cabin. Rip put his hand on the doorknob, testing it gingerly to see if it was locked. Inside, he heard Kirk's thick voice say,
"God damn, I've been wanting to get a feel of those things for a long time."
Rip wrenched the knob around and shoved the door open. Kirk looked up, startled fear in his face. It turned to rage.
"Get out of here!"
he shouted. "Be still," he snapped. "I should cut your goddamn throat."
"Look, I had to tell them that about you drinking. They wouldn't have..."
They wouldn't have done anything. They didn't threaten you. You sold out. Sold me out. Don't lie to me, you bastard, or I'll stomp your ass through the floor, Rip said through clenched teeth. You agreed to testify falsely against me if they would set you up with a free date with Kooky. You set that price. They didn't. Kirk swallowed hard. Some of the starch came back in his spine. He snarled, I got a right to get a little, same as anybody else. You're entitled to stay healthy, too, Rip retorted. And the way to do that is to tell the truth. I can't. They'd kill me. Rip pulled a $100 bill from his pocket. You're taking a trip, Billy boy. You be on the next bus for Los Angeles. It shouldn't make any difference to you. I've got you pegged. You're a drifter. And I suspect running from some charge back home, probably stealing or rape. Now, if you're still here in an hour, I'm sending out tracers to find out the truth about you. Kirk's dead white face showed that Rip's shot went home. He nervously licked his lips. Let me finish with her, then I'll go, he said thickly. Nothing doing, punk. Get moving. Kirk glared at his tormentor. Give me the dough, he snarled, reaching for the bill in Rip's hand. But as his left hand went out for the money, his right flashed up with a switchblade knife. Lamplight gleamed wickedly off the blade as he lunged for Austin's belly. Rip swung his body around, and his fingers gripped Kirk's wrist. He jerked the young tough off his feet, ground the knife out of his hand, and pulled him back up. Open the door, Kooky, Rip snapped. When she complied, he put his foot hard against Kirk's backside and propelled the youth through it. Kooky looked at the knife on the floor.
Whew, she said. He was a tough little bastard.
I suspect he came up here hoping to get a place in the rackets, Rip said. Just a punk who thinks he's tough. She came up close to him. There was an unmistakable invitation in her eyes.
Thanks,
she said softly.
Thanks for helping me out.
He grinned. It was for me, too, he said. He was a damaging witness against me. I had to get rid of him.
Perhaps I can do something for you sometimes.
Rip chose to mistake her meaning, although she waved it like a crimson flag. Yeah, you can do something for me, he said. Tell me all you can about Julie Trevor.
Julie Trevor? That queer bitch. Honey, if it's loving you want.
No, Kooky. I like a little romance, as well as the next man, but first I must break up this racket. I'd like to be able to say I'm doing it to get you girls off the hook, but I'd be lying. It's my job. That's the way I eat, drink, and pay for presents for my girlfriends. She gave him a long sidewise glance. She seemed undecided. Finally, she said,
What do you want to know about Julie?
Let's go to my car, he said. I have a sneaking suspicion that Billy Kirk might call Ace Bartlow and tip him off that we're here. He'll want to hurt me all he can before he leaves. They crossed the road to the club parking lot where he had left the rented car. As he started to get in, he thought he saw a furtive movement 2 cars away. He slipped his hand into his coat pocket, gripping the .38. He moved cautiously around the back of the fare lane. He saw a shadow slip across and into the back door of the club. He hesitated, suddenly badly worried about Kooky's safety. He considered having her get out of the car. But what good will that do? He asked himself. If that was Bartlow, and I think it was, he went on, he's seen her. He knows she's with me. He went back to the car. He slipped into the seat beside her. She snuggled protectively against him.
Who was it?
She asked. Ace Bartlow, he said shortly. I'm sorry, Kooky, but it looks like I've stuck your head in a hornet's nest. If Bartlow gets the idea you've told me anything...
I'm not afraid of him, she snapped. He's a second-rate hoodlum.
He killed Sally Vaughn. You saw that yourself.
Who told you that?
She asked, her voice strained and fearful. Nancy Oxford.
Nancy talked too damn much. That's what got her neck wrung.
That's what I mean, Kooky. Bartlow may think you're spilling something about Sally to me. She didn't reply, but he could feel her tiny body shiver. So, I want you to stay with me. I want to protect you.
Well, now, that won't be hard to take.
She squeezed his arm and added in a husky voice,
I like the goddamn hell out of you.
He wheeled the car out of the lot and onto the highway.
Where are we going?
She asked. Let's just drive for a while, he said. What about Julie?
She's a tramp. She started as a stripper on Skid Row in L.A. Then she worked the call girl racket for a couple of years. I knew her then. She was a lesbian at that time, too, but she got by with men because she was a pretty good actress. She hates men, but she can take a poor sap to bed and moan so loud he thinks he's tickling her into ecstasy. Men. Stupid bastards. I like that kind of show. But I will be damned if I can understand why. There's not one man in 10,000 customers who can honestly give a whore a hot feeling. That's why pimps make such good livings. Well, anyway, Julie did well as a call girl, but she wanted big money. $100 a night may sound big, but there's a lot of people cutting in on that. Did you know that if you pick up a John at that price every damn night of the year, you'd only gross $36,500? Do you know the best year I ever had, I only grossed $15,000. I got to keep about half of that. Hell, a secretary for some big shot makes that much, and all she has to do is lay the boss. But you aren't interested in business details, are you? Back to that bitch, Julie. She was looking for a killing. She got to be mistress of a labor racketeer. He was the one who eased her into the strippers' union as an official. Well, he got bumped off, and she formed an alliance with Lyall and Ace. Lyall's the real boss. He holds a sergeant's job on the police force as a blind. Actually, he gives orders to the chief of police, the mayor, and the county commissioners.
What are the eastern tie-ins with the peninsula? Rip asked.
New York money finances the wheels. They keep out of the way, and the running is done locally. Prostitution's purely a union racket. Julie runs it with old Lavy acting as a madam. Ace is her partner. Frank Lyall handles protection and greases the right people to keep the county wide open. His political contacts are good both in Sacramento and Washington, but it costs plenty.
Okay, now here's a hard one. Who can I trust? Remember, I'm no reformer. All I want to do is smash these union crooks' grip on you girls. Right now, you're nothing but a bunch of slaves. The National Union assures me it wants to clean house, but isn't able to.
You can trust me, that's all.
But every one of these girls is backed against the wall by these cutthroats. I can't believe...
We all hate the bastards, but they're afraid. So damned afraid that teeth chatter every time Julie and Ace's names are mentioned. You won't get anywhere with any of them unless you break those precious two.
What about old Lavy?
That old bitch is out for herself. She'd cut her own grandmother's throat for a thin dime. You can trust her as long as her interests are the same as yours. No farther.
Then if I break Julie and Ace, the girls would talk freely.
Buddy, nobody knows what a woman will do until she does it.
Yeah, I know, Rip said unhappily.
Now, one who might break is Jenny Walters. She just might break.
Is she the one who's Julie's queer playmate?
Yeah, but she doesn't like it. She hates Julie, and she hates what Julie does to her.
Yeah, I got that impression, too, Rip said thoughtfully. Julie must have some sort of hold on her.
Yeah, I don't know what it is. Lyall brought her to Julie about a month ago. She was in some kind of trouble. That's the way they recruit some of the new girls. Lyall gets the goods on them, and they have a choice of working for Julie or going to jail.
I'll look her up.
Be careful. Julie is jealous as hell of her. That rotten bitch goes for the babyface type. She wants to scratch the eyes out of any man or woman who looks at Jenny.
They all are just about at the end of the line, Kooky. Like all crooks, they start out being careful. Then success made them contemptuous of the suckers they ran over. They thought they had become too big to be touched. But they made the mistake of their lives when they let Ace Bartlow kill Sally Vaughn. They can cover up gambling, prostitution, and the rest of the rackets by buying off local and state authorities. But they can't cover up murder where the dead person is insured by a major insurance company. These companies will spend $1 million to jail a crook who swindled them out of a $5 bill.
That's not a good business, Kooky said. You could go broke fast that way.
No, Rip said. It is a good business. For some reason, everybody has the idea that gypping an insurance company is the easiest way to make a pile. Everyone from professional thieves to sweet old ladies are trying to stick us on fraudulent claims. In self-defense, the companies cannot let anyone get away with it. Bartlow is trying to hook us for $40,000 each on 2 murders. He'll not be satisfied with that. If he isn't apprehended, there'll be more killings. More company dollars bled away, which means higher premiums for our insured. And probably still more murders by others who see Bartlow getting away with the racket. If I don't knock him off, some other investigator will. This setup is going to crack wide open. Just as a friendly tip, get out while you can. Kooky shrugged.
I'm an exotic dancer. If I run out, the union will blackmail me everywhere. Sure, I'm a hustler too, but it's the dancing that baits the suckers. So, turn your collar around. You can't reform little Kooky.
Rip grinned grimly. I'm not worried about your morals. I'm worried about your neck. She looked at him oddly.
You know, she said wonderingly, you are the first son of a bitch I've met in years who thought about me instead of what he could get out of me, or into me.
Suddenly her arms went around his neck. Her passionate face was shoved up against his.
"Kiss me,"
she said fiercely. "Hey!" he cried. Blinded by her sudden movement, he couldn't see the road. The car swerved. Gravel thudded in a tiny hail against the underneath side of the fenders. Kooky laughed.
"I like you, you big son of a bitch."
Then suddenly contrite, she said,
"I'm sorry I almost wrecked us. It's just that I wanted to kiss you all of a sudden, and I couldn't wait. I know it doesn't make sense, but that's the way I am. The reason they call me Kooky is that I'm a little cuckoo. My real name's Matilda. Now, ain't that a hell of a note for an exotic dancer? They don't even name old maids that anymore."
She wriggled her body against his.
"Let's go to your place,"
she said suddenly. Her huskily passionate voice left no question of what she meant. "Okay," Rip said. He turned the car around. Kooky took one of his hands from the wheel and pulled it around her. She pushed his fingers up against the spreading expanse of her oversized breasts.
"I like you,"
she said, and she sounded surprised as she said it.
"That's funny, isn't it? I've been burned so damn many times by letting myself like a damn man, I swore I'd never do it again."
She sighed deeply as his fingers moved across the rounding curves and gently massaged her rigid nipple. She trembled, and then her entire body stiffened. She whimpered, pressed tighter against him. She jerked her hands away from his body and tore the yoke of her dress. She wore no bra. Her naked breasts heaved in the moonlight. She panted and squirmed as his fingers kneaded the soft flesh. Her own hand stole along his thigh gently, wantonly, inquisitively. She laughed delightedly.
"You acted so cold," she whispered. "I thought I wasn't getting to you. I thought I was losing my touch. I'm not. That gives you away."
She reached over and bit his ear.
"It's too far back to the motel," she whispered. "Turn right at the next corner. There's a park 2 blocks down. There's plenty of secluded places to park." "I know. That's where a shy little teenager named Matilda Kooky Marsh lost her maidenhead."
"I don't know about the park," Rip said hesitantly.
"Please," she said. "I feel like a kid again. I don't want to go to a motel. Going to those damn places makes me feel like a whore. This time with you is different. It's sort of like all this never happened, and I'm a kid again, and I'm letting a boy play with me for the very first time."
"Kooky, this is crazy."
"Please, Rip. I know I'm just a goddamn whore, but I got feelings too."
"Kooky," he said tenderly. "You—" He broke off as a police car pulled alongside.
"Pull over,"
a uniformed officer said. Rip hesitated. The sharply curving park roads made it impossible for him to kick the car in overdrive and try to outrun them. Even if he successfully made the highway, he doubted that the rental car could hold its own with the souped-up police special. He braked and pulled to the curb. It was a lonely wooded area, stretching down to a deserted playground area for children. In the distance, a single street light gleamed, a halo forming around the bulb as the first traces of a night fog moved in.
"Come out with your hands up,"
the cop said, leveling a police special at Rip's chest. Rip pushed open the door and jackknifed himself out of the car. The second officer went around the Chevrolet and threw a flashlight on Kooky.
"Looks like a rape to me,"
he said. "Her clothes are badly torn." Kooky flounced out of the car, angrily confronting the policeman who covered Austin.
"For hell's sake, Al," she snapped. "It's me, Kooky. Get off that rape kick."
Al laughed.
"Looks like we're in luck, Sam," he said to his partner. "A ringside peek at the girl who busts out all over and no cover charge to pay."
"Okay," Kooky snapped. "You've had your laugh. Now go annoy some taxpayer and let us alone."
"Sorry, Kooky," Al said, sobering. "We have orders to pick you and this bird up."
"Whose orders?"
"Frank's," he said. "Turn around, Austin. Spraddle your legs and lean your hands against the side of the car."
When Rip complied, Al slipped a .38 from Austin's shoulder holster. "I got a license for that," Rip said.
"You'll get it back. Just ask Frank for it when he releases you."
"I'm gonna be released?" Rip asked sarcastically. Al shrugged.
"As far as I'm concerned, I'm just a cop. I arrest people. The DA and the judges turn them loose."
Kooky had pulled the torn sections of her blouse together. Now she dropped them, letting her beautiful breasts gleam in the soft yellow light of the street lamp.
"Look, Al,"
she said softly, coming close to the cop.
"Nobody but us knows you found us. Maybe we can make a deal. Here." "Here," she said. "It's to my door. You and Sam come up and see me any time."
Al reached over and playfully thumped the saucy nipple that jiggled playfully at him. "To hell with that, Kooky," Rip said angrily. You don't have to give yourself to these bastards to get me out of anything. It's no-go anyway, Kooky, Al said regretfully. I can't do it. Frank wants you bad. He thinks you're spilling something to this bastard. He'd cut my throat if I let you go. There was a definite finality in his tone that told her it was useless to argue. She turned slowly and looked at Rip. Her angry expression softened for a moment as her eyes traced the strong lines of his face. Get on the horde and call Frank, Al said to Sam. Tell him we've got them.
Sorry, Al, but we're not going.
Cooky's sudden angry cry caused Rip to jerk around in sudden fear. He saw the weak streetlight gleam on the chrome of a stubby revolver she jerked from her purse. Al grabbed at her hand, twisting violently. Rip sprang toward them, but Sam dropped the radio mic and whirled to club Austin to his knees. Kooky cursed and twisted, her exposed body heaving lewdly in the violence of her exertions. Her finger jerked the trigger. The gun barrel was bent back toward her. The bullet split the flesh between her breasts where so many men had laid their heads. It plowed upward through her lungs and lodged in her neck. She collapsed in Al's arms. He said in a stricken voice, Jesus Christ! Oh, well, Kooky, I didn't mean... Blood gushed on the ground and over him. Kooky tried to raise her head. The exertion made the blood pump faster through the wound. She said, Oh, what the hell? Then her head sagged, and she died. You sons of bitches murdered her, Rip said thickly. Al looked up. He looked terrible with Cooky's blood streaking his face. Knock the bastard out, he said hoarsely to his partner. He talks too much. Sam shifted his gun around. Rip was on his knees, half dazed from the previous blow. Sam had to stoop to slam the gun butt against Rip's temple. End of Chapter 7. Chapter 8 of Strip Wench or Die by Gene Cross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 8. Rip Austin, Murderer. The next thing Rip heard was Frank Lyall's harsh voice. Pour the bastard in the back of my car. The rest of you get Cooky's body over to Austin's motel room. Don't let anybody see you. Put another bullet into her, right on top of the last one, but do it with Austin's .38. Doc Blanchard will do the autopsy. I'll see to it that he doesn't probe any farther than the top bullet. What about him? Austin recognized the voice of the policeman named Al. I'll take care of him, Lyall said grimly. You just get that girl's body into his room. That was a stupid thing to do, Al. I couldn't help it, Frank. She jumped us with that gun. You could have handled it better. You owe me a lot, Al, for covering up for you. Sure, Frank. I know I owe you a lot, Al said quickly. I'll make it up to you. You had better, the crooked lawman said grimly. You do a good job of planting that girl, and I might forget the debt. Sure, Frank, Al said, his voice shaking. You can depend on me. Okay, get moving. And when you get her in the hands of the coroner after Collins discovers her dead in his room, then call Bill Thorpe at the Peninsulaville mortuary and tell him to get her underground as quickly as possible. Sure, Frank, Al said. Positive you can handle Austin okay you're by yourself. I can come back after I take Kooky in. It'll be all over by then, Lyall said grimly. All over. By the way, tell Thorpe at the mortuary I said to have Cooky's grave dug 3 feet deeper than usual. I want her buried the day after tomorrow, but I want the grave prepared the night before. Sure, Frank, but you put a lot of trust in Thorpe, the way he's been drinking lately. You can't get that bastard drunk enough to forget that I'll bury him in one of his own goddamn graves if he lets one damn word slip. I make a trip over to the mortuary to remind him of it ever so often. I think you'd be smart to bury him now. I'm not trying to tell you your business, Frank, but he's been getting shakier and shakier lately. He's drinking more all the time. Having an undertaker on your side's one hell of a big advantage, Lyall said heavily. Just as soon as I can find enough on another one to bring him to heel, I'll plant that bastard. Well, it's your business, Al said. Rip Austin lay on the ground between them. His nose was pressed into the dirt that was wet with his own blood. He lay quietly, listening to the conversation between the two men. The tie-in between Lyall and the undertaker suggested to him a solution to the mystery of the vanishing gun wound between the breasts of Nancy Oxford. His head ached unmercifully. A scalp wound still dribbled blood down his cheek, and painful stabs in his side suggested that he had broken a rib. He tensed his body, waiting for the opportunity to grab Lyall's legs and pull the big man down. As badly beaten as he was with 3 armed men against him, he knew that he had little chance. But he also knew that it was sheer suicide not to act. Lyall's chilling order to dig Kooky's grave 3 feet deeper than normal was a direct clue to Rip's own future. He had an uncomfortable vision of his own dead body being rolled into the hole, and the dirt tamped over it. Then, when Kooky was buried on top of him, his body would be hidden in a spot where it would never be found. Blame for the deaths of Nancy Oxford and Kooky Marsh could be hung on him. His disappearance would be interpreted as admission of guilt. Slowly, so the telltale shudder of his body would not give him away, Rip took a deep breath as he steeled his aching body to jump the 3 men. All he really hoped for was to kill Lyall before the others shot him down. Suddenly his hand shot out, catching Lyall's ankle. He jerked with all his strength. There was a savage bite in his wounded ribs, but it was all drowned in the roaring crash of pain as one of the policemen kicked him in the head. Rip sprawled flat as tortured breath sobbed between his clenched teeth. Through the hammering in his head, he was only dimly conscious of his body being jerked to his knees and handcuffs snapped on his wrists. He was roughly thrown into the front seat of Lyall's car. The crooked cop crawled into the front seat of Lyall's car. The crooked cop crawled in beside him. Dimly, he heard Lyall say, "After you get her body planted in his room, come back and meet me at Ace's place. I want some help in stowing this bastard away until we can get Kooky's grave dug." Rip felt the car move off. He slowly opened his eyes and stared at the big policeman behind the wheel. The man was a dark froggish shadow that was suddenly outlined in bloody red as a neon sign flashed across the road as they drove past. Lyall did not look at his victim. His eyes were on the stream of cars ahead. He whistled through his teeth. Austin sprawled back in the seat. The frightful hammering in his head made thinking a torture. Lyall wasn't paying him any attention, but with his hands cuffed and manacles on his ankles as well, there was small chance he could overpower his captor. Suddenly the tail light on the car ahead flared a red warning. Lyall cursed and hit the brakes. The car stopped inches from the one in front, but the sudden stop threw Rip against the padded dash. The sudden jerk twisted his tortured body, sending electric flashes of pain jolting up from his ribs. "Get the hell back there," Lyall said roughly. He reached over and caught Austin by the hair and dragged him back in the seat. Rip set his teeth hard, but could not prevent an agonized groan slipping out. Lyall laughed. It was grim and short. "I warned you, you bastard," he said. "You asked for this." He released the brake as the line of traffic started moving again. The cars were almost bumper to bumper as gamblers and pleasure seekers sought to get home in time to catch a couple of hours' sleep before they had to stagger off to work. "Lyall," Austin said in a choked voice. "No deal," the cop snapped. "I offered you one once. You were too goddamn smart to take it. There's only one place for a nosy son of a bitch like you, and I'm putting you there." He turned his head to sneer at his desperate captive. Frantically, with the wild desperation of a man in a hopeless situation, Austin jerked his body around. His manacled feet lashed out. His heels jammed down on Lyall's right foot, forcing the gas pedal to the floorboard. Lyall squalled with pain as Austin's shoe soles cruelly scraped the cop's shins. The car leaped forward. Austin, knowing what was coming, braced himself as best he could. Lyall, caught unaware and his senses dulled by the sudden pain in his leg, reacted too slowly. He couldn't get his foot back on the brake quick enough. The police car rammed hard against the car in front. Austin was braced for the shock. Lyall wasn't. His breath exploded with a violent whoosh. Instantly, a car behind piled into them. Its brakes screeched as the driver tried unsuccessfully to stop. There was another heavy bump as still more cars were added to the pileup. One of the cars swerved into the opposite lane to avoid a crash. Screeching rubber and the sickening crunch of crumpled steel told Austin that it hit a car in the opposite lane. Some women screamed, several men cursed, and someone shouted for help. Rip jerked his body around and got his hands against Lyall's throat. He shoved the big policeman's head brutally against the windshield. Lyall made a strangled cry. He was dazed, but his heavy policeman's cap kept the blow from knocking him out. He dragged at his service revolver. Rip caught his wrist, forcing the gun back against Lyall's belly. Suddenly the gun went off. The explosion was deafening in the confines of the car. Blood spurted over Austin. Knowing he had only seconds, Rip rammed his hand into the dying man's pocket. His fingers touched the keyring and pulled it out. More precious seconds were lost finding the one that fitted the cuffs. Twisting his fingers around, he tried unsuccessfully to get the key into the wrist manacles. Cursing frantically, he switched to his leg irons and got them off. He straightened up, searching the ring for the key to the handcuffs. But before he could locate it, a highway patrol car pulled up. Its siren pierced the night air, and the flashing red light sent a chill of near despair through Rip Austin. It was too difficult to bend his finger back to insert the handcuff key in the lock. He dropped the key ring. Cursing, he stooped, jabbing pains shooting up from his injured ribs, and fumbled on the floor until he found the keys. Across on the shoulder of the street, he could see the highway patrolmen getting out of their car. He couldn't wait any longer. He twisted his arms painfully and slipped the keys in his pocket. Then, scooping up Lyall's gun, he stuck that inside his belt. He pushed open the car door and slid out on the pavement. He was afraid to run. They would see him. He dropped down and rolled under the car. Then, snaking along on his belly, he moved up under the car in front. Hot water from a broken radiator dripped down upon him. Here he paused to fish out the handcuff keys and try again to free himself. This time he got the key in the hole, but was unable, because of the awkward angle at which his fingers were turned, to turn the key in the lock. He squirmed around. In his haste, he cracked his head against the engine's oil pan. The blow caused his head to start hammering again. He sagged, then slowly forced himself to move again. He skidded his manacled wrists across the pavement until he found a crack he could jam the bow of the handcuff key into. Once this was done, he slipped the lock down over it. Now he had to painfully twist his body around in a last desperate effort to turn the key in the lock. There was a sharp click and the cuffs opened. He freed his hands. For a moment he was almost drunk with elation at his victory. Then he sobered. He was in the most desperate mess of his life. Before, he was arrayed against a small group of crooks, but now he had killed a policeman. It made no difference that this man was a vicious criminal himself. All law enforcement men hate a cop killer. That one fatal bullet had brought the whole world into the fight against him. Rip started to crawl back under the line of piled-up cars. At the end, he cautiously stuck his head out. He saw 2 patrolmen out in the street trying to get traffic moving around the wreck. Another was looking through the car door at Lyall's dead body. While they were thus occupied, Rip pulled himself up and walked rapidly into the darkness. He knew it would be only seconds before they discovered that Lyall had been shot and his prisoner gone. Then a check with police headquarters on the 2-way radio would send out an all-points bulletin to pick up Rip Austin. Never before in his life had Rip regretted anything as much as he regretted Lyall's death. It wasn't the man. Lyall was, or had been, a vicious mad dog killer. In that respect, Rip was glad the cop was dead. But Lyall's death and his own involvement in it would prove an almost insurmountable handicap to Austin's continuation of the case. He was a fugitive, a cop killer with little chance of proving himself innocent. Under California law, murder done during commission of a felony is automatically first degree. And Lyall's death occurred during an attempt to escape from lawful arrest. At least, the law would consider it lawful arrest. Rip's knees shook. He slowed to keep from falling. "Well, they can't hang me," he said with grim humor. "They use gas in this damn state." He came to a sign and slumped down behind it to rest and try to figure out his next move. He knew his only chance was in completely exposing the cancerous operations. Then there was a thin chance he could convince a jury that his shooting Frank Lyall was justifiable homicide. But how could he prove that Lyall was going to murder him? The 2 policemen knew it, but the chance of getting them to talk was about as likely as expecting a whore to turn back into a virgin. Any admission strong enough to help Rip would land both of them in the gas chamber. He felt himself nodding. He was so weary that the only thing he really wanted was to put his head on the hard ground and sleep. But he forced himself to get up. The dragnet might already be out for him. Time was the most precious thing he had, and there was precious little of it. He walked between 2 nightclubs and cut across a parking lot. A man and a woman were in a tight clinch in the front seat. Rip heard her moan, "Don't, Johnny, don't!" The man replied hoarsely, "You sweet bitch." Her reply was lost when the soft music from the car radio cut off for a news bulletin. Rip stiffened as the announcer said,
Peninsulaville Police have just issued an all-points bulletin for law enforcement agencies to be on the lookout for Rip Austin, an insurance investigator wanted for questioning in the brutal slaying of Police Sergeant John Frank Lyall. Lyall's body was found in his police car, shot in the stomach a few minutes ago.
Annoyed by the interruption, the man in the car switched stations. The girl said plaintively,
"Don't, honey. Don't take your hand away."
Rip turned. His eyes darted around him like a trapped animal. He knew he couldn't go any further afoot. He had to have a car. He looked in 2. Neither had a key. He knew that the chances of finding one with the keys in it was a very off chance. He turned around, his hand reaching up to pull the police revolver he had thrust in his belt. He glanced around to see if anyone was coming. Then, walking swiftly back to the car with the loving pair, he stooped so he would not attract their attention. He slid along the edge of the convertible until he got his left hand on the latch. Suddenly he swung it open. The moonlight flooded the interior. The girl's shapely legs were raised. The panting man had her panties worked down around her thighs and was trying to push them the rest of the way down. Both swung around with startled cries. The girl said, her voice shook with fright.
"Jim, is that you?"
"Get up," Rip said in a flat voice.
"Oh, my God,"
the girl whispered. "Buck up," the man said in a shaky voice. "It's not your husband after all." Then to Rip, he added, "What in hell do you want?" "Just slip under the wheel," Rip said, "and make one false move. Just one. You'll toast in hell tonight." "Who are you?" the man said thickly. "A murderer," Rip snapped. "And maybe a 2 or 3 times murderer if either of you give me trouble."
The
man began and choked. The girl cowered back against the opposite side of the car. Rip opened the back door and slipped in. "Now get moving," he said to the driver. "Take the side street, that dark one over there, and head for the city park."
"God damn. You aren't gonna..."
"I hope I don't have to kill you," Rip said. "And I'm not going to rape your woman. I just want to ride. Do I get it, or do I..." Before he could finish, the frightened man backed the car out of the lot and headed up the street. "Slow down," Rip snapped, "and turn on the radio." The first station was playing an old recording of Sugar Blues. "Punch another," Rip said. "I want the news." 2 buttons later, Rip was rewarded with another bulletin.
"This is a flash from police headquarters,"
the breathless announcer said.
"Police have just revealed that Kooky Marsh, famed exotic dancer, has been found dead in a motel room registered to Austin, the insurance investigator, being sought for questioning in the slaying of local policeman Frank Lyall. Police said indications were that Miss Marsh was killed during an attempted rape. Friends of the murdered girl said she was extremely virtuous despite her profession as an exotic dancer, and police theorized that the killer became enraged when she resisted his advances. Keep tuned to this station for later developments in this sensational case."
The girl in the front seat threw a frightened look back at Rip. "Yeah," Austin said. "That's me he was talking about." She swallowed hard, staring at him with strange fascination. The car swung off the street and into the park. It was then about 4:30 in the morning. The place was deserted. A halo was forming around the lights as a light fog started blowing in from the coast. Rip sat tense in the back seat. He glanced out the rear window, worried that a patrolling prowl car might spot them too soon. The convertible moved ahead, and at a point midway between the street lights, Rip stopped the driver. "Get out," he said. "Both of you."
"But you said..."
the man began, speaking in a strangled voice. "I'm not going to kill you if you do what I tell you," Rip snapped. "Get moving. Fast. God damn you, move!" The girl hastily pushed the door open. In her paralyzing fear, she had not bothered to pull up her pants. They were still down around her knees. They tripped her as she tried to swing out of the car. She fell with a frightened cry. Her boyfriend slipped out behind her. Rip crawled over the back of the front seat and drove rapidly away. He followed the road as it curved upward to a bluff overlooking the lake, which was the centerpiece of the park. He stopped at the edge of the road. He cut the wheels in toward the cliff. Then, setting the handbrake hard, he advanced the throttle to the point where the brake would just hold the car from moving. Then he stepped out, leaving the door open. Finally, he reached inside, releasing the brake. The convertible swerved, knocking down some small shrubs, and plunged over the cliff. Rip listened until he heard the splash as it struck the water 100 feet below. He turned then and started walking rapidly away. The way he had it planned, the 2 people he released would tell police that it was he who stole the car. This was what he had in mind when he admitted to them that he was the killer described by the radio news commentator. The tracks and broken shrubbery would lead them to the lake. He estimated that it would take 6 to 8 hours to raise the car and find he was not in it. This was a help, but still a pitifully small time for what he had to do. Austin cut across the park, keeping off the road for fear of meeting a police patrol. He walked rapidly, for he had less than an hour before dawn. He headed for Julie Trevor's place, which was just outside the park. The 2-story brick structure brought back memories of his other visit. It was only yesterday morning, not yet 24 hours, but it seemed 24 years. Rip moved along the side of the house. He didn't bother trying the door, knowing it would be locked. However, an upstairs bedroom window was open. Painfully, each step an agony of electric jabs in his ribs, Rip managed to force his way up a trellis to a small balcony. He almost didn't make it over the rail. He had difficulty bending his body because of the fiery pain in his ribs each time he bent. He lashed out with his feet. He teetered for a second and sprawled inside. The noise seemed shriek loud to him. He lay still, hoping that it was not loud enough to awaken the woman inside. But it was a vain hope. He heard a sleepy, startled cry inside. It was Julie Trevor's voice. Then he heard her say more clearly,
"What in hell was that?"
"I don't know,"
the low voice of Ginny Walter replied. The bed springs creaked. Rip cursed under his breath. His entire plan of action depended upon surprising Julie Trevor. He moved as quickly as he could, flattening himself against the wall beside the open window.
"Where are you going?"
he heard Ginny ask.
"I'm going to close that damn window,"
Julie Trevor said irritably.
"The fog's coming in."
Breathlessly, Rip waited until he saw her nude form loom up as she reached to pull the windows together. They swung out on metal tracks. He moved swiftly, panting under the painful shock of the sudden movement. He threw his legs over the sill, colliding with Julie. She cried out loudly. He struck at her blindly. Her shriek broke off with a gurgle, but she kept struggling wildly. Her fists hammered at his face. Her knee came up in his groin. Rip was blinded by the awful agony. From the waist down, he was paralyzed. All he could do was lash out blindly with his fists, hammering in desperate fury. He felt her relax with a groan. He looked up fearfully when the room light suddenly snapped on. He still had difficulty seeing, but he managed to make out the shadowy figure of Ginny Walter. He thought, but could not be sure, that she had a gun in her hand. He was in too much agony to jump her. He crouched over the unconscious figure of Julie Trevor like a numb, trapped animal. As his pain-racked vision cleared a little, he saw that it was a .38 police special in Jenny's hand. It was pointed straight at him. His desperate eyes raked her face. She stared back at him with a curious look of fright and something he could not quite figure out. It seemed to be shame. End of Chapter 8. Chapter 9 of Strip Wench or Die by Gene Cross. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 9. Strippers Strike. "Go ahead, shoot," he said harshly.
Is she dead?"
The girl ignored his harsh demand and stared with horrified loathing at the nude body of Julie Trevor. Then, suddenly realizing her own stark nakedness, she reached down with one hand and pulled one corner of a blanket up to her up-tilted breasts. Slowly, painfully, Rip got to his feet. He looked at her strangely. At the Union Hall, she had seemed embarrassed at seeing him when she walked through the office. Then her frightened run in the lunchroom and her strange attitude toward him at the strippers' class also fitted in the pattern. The most unusual part of it all was that she had never seemed afraid of him, but more as if she was ashamed in his presence.
"Is she dead?"
Ginny repeated. Her lushly curving body trembled. Her sex-kittenish face, as reminiscent of French actresses, twisted under the pressure of her loathing.
"Oh, I hope so."
"Ginny," he said quietly, "what is the matter?"
"Oh, why did you come here? I'd rather have died than to let you see me like this."
Still not knowing what was in the girl's mind, Rip tried to take his cue from her words. "Why did I come?" he repeated, watching her reaction closely. He was like a fortune-teller, searching for gestures or facial expressions which would permit him to tell Ginny what she wanted to hear. "Why did I come? Because you needed me," he said quietly. She looked at him so strangely that Rip wondered if she was all there mentally. Then Julie groaned and twisted. Her body moved lewdly, giving her big breasts a series of jerky heaves. Rip turned, but Ginny darted past him. She stooped, a graceful vision in the subdued, indirect lighting. She hit Julie viciously with the stubby barrel of the revolver, and would have beaten the older woman to death if Rip had not grabbed her.
"Let me go,"
she panted, writhing in Austin's arms. Despite his own beaten condition, the softness of her twisting body was like a stiff jolt of liquor in his belly. Some of the unbearable tiredness went out of him as the loin heat she inspired flushed up through his veins.
"I want to kill her,"
she cried fiercely. For answer, he pressed his mouth against her arching neck. His lips dug deep into the soft flesh, sucking as if to draw blood through the satiny skin. She shivered, her nakedness trembling delightfully against him. For a moment, he almost forgot the desperateness of his situation and the things he had to do if he expected to escape the gas chamber. "Ginny," he said huskily, "I love you."
"Oh, no," she cried. "Don't lie to me. People don't fall in love that quickly."
"But you love me. I can tell it in the way you look at me." She raised her head. Her face was grave. Then her lips pushed out in a childish pout.
"Oh, no," she said in a low voice. "You don't understand. I loved someone once. The dearest, sweetest love a girl can have. Then I lost him. You Well, there aren't many things about you that are just like him. You're not him come back to life, I know that, but each time I saw you, I thought of him, and it made my heart shrivel up to think of him seeing me like this. I'm not a bad girl. I don't want to do these things that terrible bitch made me do. I hate it. Oh, God, how I hate it.
Rip pulled her trembling body more tightly against him. Gently his own unsteady hands stroked the gentle curves of her naked body. He struggled between desire for her lush body and the need for learning as much as he could for a lever to force Jenny Walker into supplying him with vital evidence in return for him keeping quiet about her aberrations. It wasn't your fault, he suggested, deciding that in her present mood a sympathetic approach would be more productive than trying to make love to her.
I wish now I'd spit in their faces, she cried fiercely. I'd have gone to jail, but that's better than this, being fed on by that awful bitch.
Tell me about it. It'll make you feel better, he suggested.
We never had any money at home, and I wanted pretty things. I thought that was why I lost him. I looked so tacky in my cheap stuff, so I started taking things. The manager of Street's department store caught me putting a pair of lace panties in my purse. He turned me over to Frank Lyall. I didn't know it then, but Lyall was using his position with the police to recruit girls. He'd get his filthy hands on someone like me and give us the alternative of going to jail or going to work as a stripper. Exotic dancer, he called it. The rotten, lying son of a bitch. It was whoring, but you didn't know that until you got in the racket so deeply you couldn't get out. They started you as a dancer, and you just strip down to a G-string in the early shows. Then you graduate to the midnight rambles where you take everything off. The next step is selling yourself to anyone who wants you. The acts are nothing but a showcase to peddle your body.
She paused, a deep sigh causing her almost virginal breasts to tremble as if in girlish fear.
Even that wouldn't have been so bad, she went on tragically. But Julie saw me. You know the kind of bitch she is. She hungers after girls, and she's insanely jealous of every girl she picks up. I couldn't get near another girl or man without her flying into an awful rage. She'd throw things and beat me. Even that was better than what came after. She'd cry then and beg me to forgive her, and she'd tear off my clothes and run her filthy hands all over me, and her rotten mouth would go all over me, kissing and tonguing. And oh, I can't talk about it.
She broke off, weeping. Rip let his hand drop along the spreading curve of her hips and move in on her rounding buttocks. It's all over now, he said gently. You're free of her.
You don't understand,
Jenny whimpered. She ground her naked body tightly against him, breasts, belly, and pelvic regions grinding into his own flesh. It was all the more seductive because it was unconscious on her part.
You don't understand,
she repeated.
Julie is a devil. She'd kill me if I tried to run away. She is insane when she gets angry. Yesterday, Frank Lyall wanted me to pay a debt he owed that stinking undertaker. The grave-digging bastard wanted me for the night. I thought Julie would go crazy. She nearly shot both of them.
Why? Rip asked sharply. What kind of a debt did Lyall owe the mortician?
I don't know. I don't care. He's a stinking bastard who gives me goose pimples. But I'd rather lay with him than be mouthed by Julie.
I think I know what that debt was, Jenny, Rip said. Something Lyall said gave me the clue. If you'll help me, I can smash all of them. Ace Bartlow, Julie Trevor, the mortician, the whole rotten bunch. You'll be free, Jenny. Free. She shivered and said dully,
Nobody can beat them. They have the law and the courts both in their hands.
Jenny, Lyall is dead. I killed him. The police are after me. The only way I can save myself is to prove that it was justifiable homicide. I can do it if you'll help me.
I can't do anything,
she said dully.
I'm afraid.
Jenny, Kooky Marsh said if I ever needed help to come to you. You know Kooky?
She's my friend. I guess the only friend I have in the world. Cooky's just a whore, but she has a heart. The biggest heart any woman ever had.
She's dead, Jenny. Frank Lyall had her killed. Jenny's body trembled more violently in his arms.
I'll be next,
she whispered. Not if you help me, he said urgently.
But what can I do?
She said tearfully, raising her face to him. I need to get Nancy Oxford's body exhumed.
What's whatever you said?
Dug up. I know now that Lyle got that damn mortician to cover up the wound between her breasts with mortician's wax, so it wouldn't show. They had to do that to turn the murder into an accident so they could collect double indemnity insurance. The only way I can get the body exhumed is by a local court order. I can never get it in this district where the gang controls the courts. I've got to force it. You can help me.
Okay,
she said dully.
let them kill me. I'd as soon be dead as keep on this way.
Okay, here's what I want you to do. I'm tying up Julie to keep her out of this. You go down to Union Hall and tell the girls Julie said for them to pull a strike. Get out in front of every dive in town and picket the goddamn places. They won't know about your tie-in with Julie. They won't question the order. They'll think it came from Julie.
But what good will that do?
A strike of strippers will be news. Every damn reporter who can hobble will shag his ass up here. The gang has the local press muzzled, but men will be coming in to cover the strippers' strike who won't be on the gang's payroll. When they get here, then the rest is up to me. You just get the picket lines out.
I don't know if the girls will...
You go to old Lavy. Tell her it's an order from Julie. She'll get the girls out.
When do you want them to start?
Noon today. The clubs won't be open, but I want the story on the wire in time to hit every afternoon paper in the nation.
I better get going then, Ginny said. Just hold me tight for a minute before I go.
Her arms tightened around him. Finally, she said,
Did you really kill Frank?
Yes, he said.
Will you kill her too?
She asked fiercely. If I get a chance, he said. Reluctantly, she took her arms from around his neck. She whirled around and ran from the bedroom. It was growing light outside. There was some fog, but it probably would burn off by 9 o'clock. The clock on the nightstand beside Julie's bed pointed to 5:30 a.m. As Rip Austin turned, he caught a glimpse of his face in the dressing table mirror. He was haggard. His eyes were as red as a drunk's and deeply sunken in his weary face. Julie Trevor regained consciousness while he was tying her up with strips torn from her silken sheets. He had taken the precaution of gagging her. Her eyes glared vicious hate at him. He dragged her over to a walk-in closet and shoved her back in a corner. Julie, he said, it's all over. Lyall's dead. I killed him. I'm after Ace Bartlow now. If you want to stay out of the gas chamber yourself, you had better be ready to play ball with me when the time comes. She twisted violently, stopped when her bonds cut cruelly into her naked flesh. Rip stood for a moment staring at her before he closed the door. The statuesque nudity with its sculptured curves failed to stir him anymore. When he thought of the sex session he had with her, it made him feel sick. Hastily, he slammed the sliding door to shut out the wicked sight of her rotten, perverted body. Rip rummaged around the room until he found a partially empty bottle of liquor. He downed a healthy drink and then threw himself on Julie's bed. He reached for the telephone on the stand, but before he dialed, he got up again. It was too soft, too dreamy. As hungry as he was for sleep, he knew he would drop off in spite of himself if he lay there to make his calls. He stood up, backing against the wall to help support his tired body. He dialed long distance and asked for the San Francisco information. He asked for the numbers of a dozen union business agents and started making his calls. When the first was completed and a sleepy voice demanded to know what in hell anybody wanted at the obscene hour of dawn, Rip said, This is Rip Austin. I'm business agent for the club dancers. That's a stripteasers union down here on the peninsula. The girls are in a jam. They're pulling a strike at noon. How about your boys give us some moral support?
Is this a goddamn joke?
The trucker chief demanded. Hell no, Rip said. It's on the level. The girls will be out in their G-strings on the picket line at noon today. Now how about your boys giving us a hand? Don't send any trucks across our lines to supply these clubs and give us your public support.
This is the damnedest thing I ever heard of, the union official said. But I don't think it's even necessary to put this thing to a vote of the membership. If I know these horny drivers of ours, they'll jump at the chance to help a bunch of strippers. In fact, I wouldn't be surprised if they didn't get out and join him in line.
Rip smiled grimly as he broke that connection and ran through his list of other unions. He called each one, getting a pledge to support the girls. It'll leak, Rip said with satisfaction as he cradled the phone after the final call. Something as hot as picket lines and G-strings will have every reporter in the nation down here by the time the girls are out. He looked at his watch. It had taken him an hour and a half to get all his union calls through. He shook his head. Time was slipping away too fast for all he had to do. What he had in mind was built on such shaky ground that he had to have every possible bit of evidence to back himself up. He began a systematic search of the house, but before he was half through, the phone rang shrilly. Rip hesitated, wondering if he should let it ring or risk answering. If the wrong party was calling, a man's voice replying might start a disastrous chain of events. Finally, he decided to ignore it. He crossed the room and switched on the radio to catch the first newscast. The phone kept ringing, long beyond the normal time one would expect someone to hang on at the other end. Whoever was there knew that someone was home. Rip decided it was worse to let it ring than to risk answering. He picked it up.
Rip.
It was Jenny's anxious voice. "Jenny," he said, "is something wrong?"
No. Old Lavvy will have the girls on the picket line at 12 sharp. But somebody must have talked. We're getting hundreds, it seems, phone calls here at Union Hall. Newspapers, television stations, magazines, and writers are calling like mad to find out if it's true.
"That's okay. It's part of the plan," Rip said. "Switch some of the bigger ones, like Associated Press, United Press, the NBC and CBS TV newscasters, and the big radio stations, to me at this number. Tell them I'm Mr. Ripley, a union representative." The first call switched was a big television network. "Yes," Rip told the caller. "The strike goes on at 12 noon. But do us a favor and keep it off the air until that time. I don't want any police interference before we can get the girls on the picket line."
What's the beef?
He was asked. "They're striking for the right to be treated like human beings instead of slaves. This is hot. It's the rottenest, lewdest, filthiest story to break in years. It'll reach into politics. It's the story of the year."
"We'll send down a field unit to film the thing," the newscaster said. "Will you cooperate and let us get some shots of the girls in G-strings carrying placards?"
"Sure," Rip said. "We'll throw in some bumps and grinds to warm things up."
"Great, but don't make it too rough. TV is bogged down in censorship."
For over an hour, Rip fed a similar line to other big news sources. Then he had to cut off, for he couldn't spare any more time. In any event, he knew that he had stirred up sufficient press interest to ensure the town overflowing with reporters. He finished his search of the house, uncovering a locked bond box. When broken open, he found a bundle of $1,000 bills, 50 in all, and an account book which didn't make much sense. The money he slipped in his pocket. The book he hid in a new place for later. He wanted his company's accountants to inspect it. He suspected that it would provide strong evidence for an income tax charge against Julie and Ace Bartlow. At 10:30, he got a jolt when the radio told him that police divers had gone down to the car he pushed off the cliff. His body had not been found, and a new alert was broadcast for him. He expected that they would not find out until later, and he would have a free hand to move around without fear of being tapped before he got all the loose ends tied up. At 12 sharp, Jenny came for him and drove him to Union Hall. Old Lavvy's eyes bugged as he came in.
"By God," she said heavily, "I couldn't figure out what in hell Julie meant by this strike crap. Now I know it was you."
"Yes, Maggie," he said. "It was me."
"What do you expect to get out of it?"
"I'm smashing this rotten racket, Maggie."
"You haven't got a chance."
"You're going to help me."
"You're crazy. I'm looking out for me."
"And I'm looking out for you, too." He pulled out the sheaf of $1,000 bills. He slipped off 5 for Jenny to get a start on later. The rest he tossed on the desk in front of the old tart. "There's a bus pulling out of here for Frisco in half an hour," Rip said. "A transpolar flight will put you in Europe in 9 hours. There's $45,000 in that pile. You should have a little stake of your own. Together they'll make a pile that will keep you on the Riviera for the rest of your life." The old woman licked her lips.
"Who do I have to kill?"
"Somewhere there are records on this mess. Where are they?" Wordlessly, the old woman reached over and picked up the telephone.
"Bus station. Book 1 seat on the Frisco special," she said.
Then, getting heavily to her feet, she took a small key out of her desk and slid it across to Rip.
"There's a safe in the back room. Turn the dial 3 times to the right and stop on G. Reverse twice and stop between S and T. Then go on to B. The key is to an inside compartment. There are some payoff records inside that will blow the mayor, county commissioners, and the police sky high. There's nothing in there that will get you off the hook in your murder raps."
"Thanks, Maggie. That will be a big help." She walked to the door.
"If you're ever around the Riviera, come up and see me sometime."
"I'll be honored," Rip said with a smile. The strike broke at 12:15. Traffic piled up as drivers stopped to ogle the scantily clad girls parading along the club strip with their placards. TV crews perched on top of station wagons sent the pictures across the nation, as coast-to-coast hookups interrupted scheduled programs to bulletin the oddest strike in the history of the labor movement. Cursing frantic city fathers, scared to death of any publicity that might focus attention on the cancer beneath the glittering neon of Peninsulaville, screamed for police to get the girls off the street. There were too many of them, and they were scattered over too wide an area for the police to close in quick enough. Then the traffic jams added to their difficulties. They couldn't drag the girls into police headquarters fast enough to prevent newsreel, TV, and press photographers from getting their shots. Al Simmons, the policeman who had apparently stepped into Frank Lyall's shoes, addressed the crowd of newspapermen at police headquarters. Jenny drove Rip down. In the wild melee, he was able to mingle unnoticed with the press group. "It's nothing but a goddamn publicity stunt," Simmons told the news group. "That's all, and I'm going to have somebody's ass for it. You boys have just been suckered in on a cheap publicity stunt." "It doesn't seem possible anyone would be stupid enough to pull something like this just for publicity," a commentator for a big network said. "I'd like to talk to some of the girls." "Sure," Al said. "Bring in some we arrested, Pete." When the girls were brought from the women's section of the jail, they were asked what was behind the strike.
"Hell, I don't know," a buxom girl said. "I was told to get the hell out and picket, so I got the hell out and picketed."
One after another, the others admitted that they didn't know what was going on either. "Well, that's it, boys," the questioner said disgustedly. "It looks like we were suckered after all." Grim-faced, Rip started to push his way through the packed room. The whole thing was rapidly falling to pieces around him. He had to put them back together fast. "Wait," he said. "I'll tell you what it's about." "Hey," someone shouted. "That's the bird's picture they showed on TV. He's wanted for murder."
Grab that man. He's Rip Austin. He's a killer.
Two burly policemen grabbed Rip by each arm. "Wait a minute. I've got something to say to the press." "Get the son of a bitch out of here," Al Simmons squalled. "He's a murderer. Get him in a cell." Desperately, Rip realized they were going to try and prevent him from speaking. Once they got him out of sight, it would be the old story. Shot while trying to escape. He jerked back, knocking one of his captors loose. His left hand snatched the gun from his coat pocket. He cracked it across the skull of the other policeman. He pitched forward. Al Simmons dragged for his own gun, but Rip covered him. White-faced, Simmons backed against the wall. "Grab him, somebody, before he kills again," Simmons stuttered. $5,000 reward to the man who gets him." "The first man who makes a move toward me gets lead in the belly," Rip shouted. "I just want to talk to you for 2 minutes. No more. And then I'm willing to go to jail." "You can't say a goddamn thing," Simmons bawled. "You're a prisoner." "Shut up, you bastard. I'll let you have it the way you gave it to poor Kooky Marsh." He reached over and pulled Simmons' service revolver. He tossed it into the crowd of newspapermen. A reporter caught it gingerly. "Hang on to that," Rip snapped. "Turn it over to the FBI for a ballistic check. I know, in fact, that the rifling on the barrel will check with the bullet in the breast of Kooky Marsh. There's a story for you, boys. How come the bullet in the girl I'm supposed to have killed matches the gun owned by a goddamn policeman?" "You son of a bitch!" Simmons squalled. His face was dead white. In his fear of what Rip might say, he suddenly lunged at Austin despite the threat of the gun. Austin hesitated too long before shooting. Simmons bore him down. 2 newsmen grabbed his arms and tore the gun from his grasp. "Get the murdering bastard out of here quick," Simmons bawled. "Hold it. We want to talk to Austin. He's made some serious charges," a TV man cried. "You're not going to talk to anyone. Get the hell out of here, all of you." "Don't get gay, Simmons," Austin snapped. "You're on TV right now. The whole damn country is watching you and wondering what the hell you're scared of." The cop whirled around, staring with startled eyes at the portable TV transmitter focused on him by a network man. "Get that damn thing out of here," he shouted. "Where's my gun? I want my gun back." Suddenly he realized that he was giving himself away. In his funk, he had behaved like an idiot. He made an effort to get himself in hand, but could only stand there trembling as he realized that it was impossible to intimidate these men. They would talk to Austin, and there was nothing he could do about it. He had moved into something too big for him. He lacked the guts and the intelligence to take Frank Lyall's place. Swiftly, Austin sketched for the now quiet group the story of the rotten intimidation and white slavery that kept the Peninsulaville clubs operating. But terrorizing and raping these unfortunate girls wasn't enough, he went on. They had to stoop to murder. Police records show that in at least 2 cases, those of Sally Vaughn and Nancy Oxford, the police, coroner, and a dishonest undertaker united to cover up murder. An honest autopsy will show that both were murdered. Sally was beaten to death and Nancy was shot. I ask that you use the power of the press to force officials to exhume both of their bodies and that medical criminologists be brought down from San Francisco to investigate their deaths. He motioned to Jenny, who brought him the books they got from old Lavy's safe. In these, Rip went on, is the story of criminal payoffs to certain state officials to keep this cesspool stinking. The governor doesn't seem to be involved, so if he knows what's good for him, he'd better appoint a commission to look into this mess right now. Okay, boys, that's it. Sure, I killed Frank Lyall. He was the kingpin in this rotten white slavery and murder racket. I killed him to protect my own life. That's all I have to say. The rest is up to you. The next 3 hours were a confused panic. The strippers, relieved of fear of death, talked freely. The undertaker, Thorpe, tried to flee the county, but was caught. Julie Trevor tried to turn state's evidence to keep from going to jail. The order was given for the exhumation of the 2 murdered girls. Because of the complete involvement of local police, the governor put the entire county under martial law and assigned special agents to dig into the mess. An inquest was held in the death of Lyall, and a verdict of justifiable homicide was returned. When Rip was released, Jenny Walter met him at the entrance to police headquarters. "Jenny," he said tenderly, "I owe it all to you. Is there something I can do in return?" She dropped her eyes.
"Yes,"
she said, somewhat embarrassed.
"I'm going away. I don't know where, but it will be somewhere that I can forget all these terrible things. But before I go, I wish—"
"Yes, Jenny?" he asked when she hesitated.
"I feel dirty. It's a dirtiness water won't wash away. It's an uncleanness I got from my association with Julie Trevor. It's a dirtiness only a man can rid me of. Will you—"
He pulled her gently to him and kissed her, to the surprise of people passing in the street. "Jenny, nothing I have ever been asked does me greater honor." They drove to a motel. Jenny tore her clothes off and threw herself at him. Their nude bodies fused in the passionate beauty of 2 people perfectly mated. End of Chapter 9. And end of Strip Wench or Die by Gene Cross. Read by Ben Tucker.